That's probably my regular microphone. Oh, or is it this one? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm already set up. Huh. Welcome. I'm starting early because I have to get caught up. Well, what do I mean? I don't even know what that means. I'm just starting early because I said so. What's my audio levels at? Who even knows? You know what? I'm probably loud enough. I think. If I'm not, actually, you know what? I feel like I'm not loud enough. Hold up. Can I go to my settings? No. Profile? No. Well, I guess I could just make everybody quieter relative to me. That's another option. I'll just do that. Okay. If people come. So welcome to thing that I do. I think my music's too loud, but I can't know that for sure, but it probably is too loud. I'm just gonna tune that down. It's just gonna be in the background unless people don't like it, in which case we stop doing it. I don't want to do anything that's dumb and doesn't feel good. So hi, my name is Jane. I go by Jane the Message because I have an artist name, even though I haven't put out any music for a decently long ass time. Like, you're not supposed to wait that long, but it's gonna happen. I'll have music coming out. But in the meantime, I do autism peer support because it's hard to do life when you have autism, and peer support we have modified just this year to mean peer motivation support, because the motivation part I think is the biggest issue to figure out and to recontextualize, because I believe that autism, well, let me start this over. I have a theory of autism that I think is probably pretty darn good. And because of that theory, I think that we have a different way of doing, so motivation itself is different in autistic people because the doing is different. So the motivation is not coming from the same mechanism at all. And that's why it behaves so differently, and you can't approach it the same way as a person without autism would approach any sort of goal, quote unquote. We don't do goals, we do something else. I wanted to go deeper into something, and then I forgot that I wanted to do that. It is possible that it would be a good use of my time right now to do that, except I forgot I wanted to, and my phone is dead. Is that correct? Yes, my phone is dead. Okay, good. I also will be having a I Need a New Phone fund starting up pretty soon, if you'd like to contribute to that, because my phone doesn't want to live anymore. It's wants to be put out of its misery, and it's suffering to be ended, because yeah, it doesn't work. It holds a charge for like an hour. That's it. Maybe less, actually. If I'm really using it, maybe less. Right. So, I'm wondering if I should... Maybe I should look this up. I have 20 minutes, or 10 minutes. Perfect. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to look up something from George Lakoff that I wanted to. Okay. George Lakoff. Okay. How the embodied mind brings mathematics into... Oh, there's a book. Oh, I could just read this book. Okay, that's not bad. Paperback or hardcover? Interesting. Interesting. Let me ask ChatGPT to summarize this for me, because I will want to read it. What year is this from? 2001. Interesting. There's evidence of my theory elsewise. I'm going to ask it to summarize this book. George Lakoff and Raphael. Oh, interesting. See, copy. Okay. Where mathematics comes from, how the embodied mind brings mathematics into being. I'm going to read this out loud and then we'll talk about it in the discussion today. Where mathematics come from, how embodied mind brings mathematics into being, by George Lakoff and Rafael Nunez, is a profound exploration of the cognitive science behind mathematical thought, proposing that mathematics is not a transcendent universal truth, but rather a product of the human mind's inherent capabilities. I believe this is true. The authors argue that mathematical ideas are grounded in the body's interaction with the world and are conceptualized through a series of metaphors that make abstract concepts comprehensible. I agree. Here's a summary of the key points and metaphors discussed in the book. Embodied mathematics. Lakoff and Nunez assert that mathematical thought is rooted in the physical and sensory experiences of the human body. Correct. This notion challenges the traditional view of mathematics as purely abstract, suggesting instead that I'm going to put this on screen. Hold on, because this is what we're discussing today, basically. Through metaphors, these metaphors, where are we? This notion challenges the traditional view of mathematics as purely abstract, suggesting instead that our understanding of math is built upon the embodied mind's experiences. Conceptual metaphor theory. The authors extend Lakoff's earlier work on conceptual metaphor theory to mathematics, suggesting that we understand complex mathematical concepts through metaphors grounded in physical and everyday experiences. Correct. And if you don't have access to the typical ones, you're going to have some issues, is what I think autism actually is. These metaphors are not just linguistic, but conceptual, shaping how we think about and engage with mathematical ideas. Key metaphors in mathematics. The basic metaphor of infinity, BMI. This metaphor helps explain how humans grasp the concept of infinity, not through direct experience, but by extending the idea of a process that goes on indefinitely. The metaphor of arithmetic as motion along a path. This is where autism gets funky. This metaphor conceptualizes arithmetic operations like addition and subtraction as moving forward or backward along a path. This is doing as arriving. The container metaphor. This is about to be doing as building. Used to understand sets and subsets in mathematics where numbers or elements are seen as being inside or outside a container. Yep. The metaphor of mathematics as a landscape. This metaphor helps in visualizing mathematical problems and concepts as locations within a landscape with the solutions being reached by navigating this terrain. Yes. And this is why show your work is weird for autistics, I believe. Implications for mathematics education. Lakoff and Nunez suggest that recognizing these metaphors can transform mathematical education. You sure are correct, it would, by leveraging our innate embodied experiences, and the metaphors that arise from them. Educators can make mathematical concepts more accessible and intuitive to students. They also can correct for something I think that's happening culturally that's creating too much doing as arriving incentives and reinforcement. The book presents critique of Platonic. Yes, critique of Platonic realism. I hate Plato. Yes, I do. I want to kick his baby into a pit. If I ever could time travel, that's like the plan. Plan 1, Plato. Boop. That's me kicking a baby. The book presents a strong critique of Platonic realism, the philosophical stance that mathematical entities exist independent of human thought. Instead, Lakoff and Nunez argue for a more human-centric view of mathematics, emphasizing its origins in human cognition and metaphorical thought, which you can do successfully if you analyze autism, because there is a split here, and it actually ostracizes us as a group of people within our own species. Where mathematics comes from is both controversial and groundbreaking, offering a fresh perspective on the nature of mathematical knowledge and cognition. It challenges readers to recognize the origins of mathematical thought and the ways in which we understand and teach mathematics. Very cool. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's 4, those are the 4 metaphors. Okay, I'm going to ask, can you talk a bit more about the 4 metaphors? Several key metaphors that illustrate how human conceptually view okay, so let's just let it type. So, basic metaphor of infinity, which is like measurements, right? This is measurements too. So these 2 are doing as arriving. This is doing as building. This is still doing as arriving, which is interesting. Helps in locations. Well, it's sort of. Actually, let me start that over. So maybe this is kind of both can use this. It's not that we aren't aware of the landscape, it's just that most of it has to be inferred, and that's why I think autistics can be good at like abstract mathematics or just abstractions in general, because inferences are really important to have in that case, where it's like you don't actually get to concrete check everything that you're suggesting as part of the dynamic involved with all of the different specific points. Yeah. Interesting. So, but this part is solving mathematical problems like traveling from one location. I'm gonna ask, are there other metaphors explored in the book? The book has a wide range of conceptual metaphors. Additional metaphors, numbers as objects. Yes, that's doing as building. Arithmetic is object collection. That's doing as building. These are doing as building. Yes. Algebraic constructions of objects, doing as building. The balance scale metaphor, often used in teaching algebra. This metaphor is an equation has a balance scale where operations aim to keep the scale balanced by performing the same manipulation on both sides. Yeah, I also would call that in and of itself recursiveness as a property, but yeah. Metaphors, containers. This is a problem. This is a problem. This is why maybe geometry can implode for people. Hello. just getting started. I started early for once. Metaphors for calculus functions as machines. This works. Antithesis metaphor. Huh. Conceptual blending in mathematics. Interesting. Okay, somebody else is here. Who is here? Hello. We're going to talk a little bit about mathy stuff, and then we're going to talk about belief in our ability to do things. Is the idea. But yeah, my theory is reified yet again. And it explains why autistic people are like both good and bad at math, potentially. If you teach math as number lines and sequences. So, yeah. Woohoo. Yeah, spatial temporal sequencing is a problem for us because I'm right. Because I'm right. And why am I right? Because I'm good at doing object construction. That's why. Anyways, I'm going to be reading a book, it seems. Hello! Hi! Welcome in! And for anybody that's joining as just an audience member, or whatever that's called, I don't even know what this would be called, if they ever do join. What are they?
Remote participant?
Yes, there we go. Remote participants. We like that. Remote participants can always chime in. I don't always see chat, but I appreciate people. Or if someone decides to watch this later on, dope. Hello to you in the future. Hello, future person. I am past me. All right. So here we go. My theory is right, just to make that super clear. And we just have to wait for the world to catch up. I feel on Friday, was that right? On Friday or Saturday, I realized how right my theory was. Maybe it was Saturday. Maybe it was yesterday. Anyways, but I enjoyed the moment that I had, at least for a brief moment, maybe won at the smartest person on the planet competition, even though it's not that competition. Nobody actually recognizes it or cares or can measure it. Maybe an alien can, but it's like, I won! I did it! I know what autism is.
Over.
Yeah. I built it.
You won.
I won. So I'm proud of that. Yeah, I'm proud of that. And I don't give a flying poop if someone's like, why would you say such a silly thing? Because I'm right, and I won. And all I need to know is that I won. So Lakoff talks about math being built out of two main metaphors, and this is why autistics can be both very good at math and very not good at math. One of them is like a measuring stick, and then movement across terrain, which I've already talked about in depth, but this person just sort of repeated what I was saying. So basically that would be the metaphor of arithmetic as motion along a path. Good luck to us, we don't do that. So yes, that won't work very well. We may have some conceptual realization of it, but we would have to actually get to the deeper logic of it, and that is container metaphor, where a container holds objects. And guess what autistic people like to do? We like to put objects in containers and take them out a lot longer than other people do. And I think even when we line things up, we're lining it up in an unconventional way. So we're probably trying to find a workaround at that point already for how are we going to deal with mathematics being explained as motion across a space from one point to another point to another point. And even, just the idea that like arithmetic, here, for example, arithmetic is object collection and construction. This metaphor extends the idea of numbers as objects by viewing operations like addition or collecting objects into groups as constructing a new set from subsets. So we're doing set theory really young to compensate, and it's possible that when we line things up, we're proposing relationships between the different things that would then suggest how one set can move into another set, but that's not counting along a number line. That's not how you move from one point to the other. It's not by taking similarities and juxtaposing them to understand how you can jump from one concept to the next concept to the next concept, which is actually bridging between categories. So there's like when you have one set and you have another set and they share features, you might be able to jump to the features of one set from the features of the other set that they share in common. You're basically making them relevant. It also would explain why we're not good at retelling stories in order. So a bunch of things that you can see in autistics really early on, and errors that we'll make pretty consistently, that I also made, by the way, as a 6-year-old, but they decided not to count. Whatever, didn't, because girl. But basically, like, a lot of the phenomenon in autism is explained pretty much perfectly by my theory. Like, it just is that. Like, in fact, it describes it. No, not so much explains it as like, is it, and I'm even doing it to do it, because we're missing information. So what I've been doing is collecting features and descriptions and people describing something over and over again. And that allows me to create sets in my mind of like what this thing includes and excludes. And then after a while, I know what to look at and what not to look at, because if something doesn't match the consensus, it could be all of the consensus is wrong, which I can also investigate, right? So then you can always check that. Or this could be discarded, especially if, you can, anyways, you get really good at that process over time if you're autistic, because you have to keep building sets and then consolidating things that are sets into something that's predictive of behavior, because we aren't going to be able to do things in real time, is my argument, because you need to be able to do global configurational reasoning in order to just like move in a way that benefits other people also moving. We don't know how to do that. And so that's why when we are really good at anything, it's really hard to get recognized and then to have money in society. And this is why we're under and unemployed. This is why we're so poor. This is why things are not going well. We go wrong place, wrong time, wrong stuff all the time in ways that we don't even know are bothering other people, because we can't even evaluate the value of being able to bring this thing to that place at that time, because all of it is an unknowable skill set, because we have a disability that should be thought of as profound as something like congenital blindness, and in fact has features in common with it, and we should compare research with congenitally blind and autistic people a lot more often. So that said, other things to talk about besides mathy like autism stuff is that fact that we absolutely need to make sets of objects that allow us to then create other objects out of it. And if our space does not allow for that, we're going to go crazy and not be okay. So we need to be able to do that. We also need to do it in a conscientious way, because we can just get locked onto something because it seems to be recursive, like it seems to be stable, but it's being made artificially stable by society, in which case if we invest in those things and society decides it's uncool, we're kind of foobar. So we have to make sure the thing that we are interested in really is stable, and it's not just the emperor's new clothes. And that's also maybe why we're so angry at the emperor's new clothes. It's not that we have like some magical sense of justice. It's more that like that's going to be a huge problem for us if people do that behavior, because we can't navigate the way the typical person can. So we need accurate information, and they're getting in the way of us having that. So, and they're conditioning people that could give us accurate information into not doing so. So it's eroding the trust that we get to have in other people. And that's all my stuff. And woo.
That all sounds right to me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Hugely appreciated.
I mean, I think it works in like a language based model as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, a lot of people teach reading and learn to read as these like static pieces, right? Like, this is the word the, this is the letter T. Mm-hmm. And like, they don't learn about they don't learn from this idea of like language is fluid and you can move all the pieces around, and like it's related to this in this way, but then it's not related to that in that other way.
Yes.
And like, sounds are different from, like, in one word, there's like the sound you hear when you say the word, the letters that represent the sounds, the meaning that then, you garner from the sound, the collection of sounds that you hear, mm-hmm. like blended in a certain way. like plus or instead or like on top of like the symbols that we use to signify those sounds.
Yep.
Right, like, and that you can break one word apart into all of these different pieces. And like if you can manipulate words like exactly the same way that you can manipulate numbers.
Yes.
But if you don't have a true understanding of like number sense, you can't. You just know that like this is the algorithm, right? So it's like learning algorithms as opposed to learning like number sense and number relationships.
Yes.
And it's the same with the language. If you just learn like, you know, letters and sounds and then sight words, which is the way it's mostly taught, honestly, completely separate from comprehension and vocabulary. Like there all seem to be these separate things, and it's just if you have a base of what language is, what its purpose is, what it is used for, like you can make it work for you.
Yep. This gets into
what to do with it.
This gets into my frustration too with talking to most people, because most people did not learn language properly. So I'll get people that are upset because I'm using a word, and rather than just looking up the word and then owning not only that word but the composite parts of it, because when you look up the word you should look up the etymology of the word and then see what's related to the word and like what the implications are and what the shading and nuance of the word is. Right. And
you cut out there for a minute. Is that me or you?
It might be me. Can I get feedback?
It's not you, Lauren.
It's not me. Okay.
No,
it's me.
I had that happen too.
She definitely died. Okay. I can tell you that much.
Okay. Let me. Hopefully, if that keeps happening, I'll do something different. But okay. So what I was saying was, yeah, if I talk to somebody and they're not keeping up with what I'm saying, what seems to derail them is that they don't know a word, right? And then they're like, well, I don't use that word. I'm like, well, just take it now. I'm like giving it to you. Like, go look it up. And also, like, it's like they believe that you memorize words and then you just remember that you have that word forever. Like it's a place that you've been to. Like I remember that I went to, you know, the market or something like that, and that you have to know it well by remembering it all the time or recalling it. I'm like, no, it's not a memorization thing. You will constantly forget what words mean exactly, but if you remember it, if it's in your memory as a set that belongs to something, then the boundaries of it are as clear as like a characteristic of like a dog. Like a dog has typically 4 legs and a tail with exceptions, right? And so once you have the concept of a dog, you can like figure out which dog you like the best. Like I like that one or that one. So each word has members of you know, its general category of concepts that you might be able to then jump to and like a little bit better. So it's so weird to me because it's like, no, you always re-engage with the word. You don't memorize it and move forward. It's not a step along the road and then you never revisit it. Yeah. So I get weirded out by that because grown-ass adults are constantly saying stuff like that to me.
Yeah, it's really strange, and like the thing about it is that and this is my huge issue with education. Like when I was a teacher, not like I'm not a teacher now, but when I was in the classroom, right? Like, you know, I had my class and I taught them, you know, I did it. Like there are curriculums that are really good, but like they do take a lot of intellectual work to understand and like implement properly. And the things that do it well enough to perform on an assessment or to like check the box and move on, those are much easier to teach. That is very true, right? Like that's so true. But the good stuff takes a lot of effort intellectually on the part of the instructor, and like nobody wants to do that. Nobody's interested in that. And to be honest, for what we get paid, like I don't know that it's like I'm, you know, necessarily like shaming people for that.
Yeah.
I don't get paid enough to like sit and the concept of numbers and you know what I mean, like like we just don't, and they don't teach it to us. That's not how they do teacher education either. So it's so there's so much emphasis on data, and it's hard to take data in these more globally based curriculums, and you know it just there's a lot of barriers to it, and it's very frustrating. Very frustrating.
Well, it's weird because like getting that figured out would be a big difference for autistic people and everybody. I mean, a lot of people that are unhappy right now, including all of us, it's because using global configurational reasoning as the priority, as the essential, right? Like, oh, we'll reinforce that makes no sense, because people who have that skill, they'd learn it just by running around on the classrooms, like, you know, off time or in the playground, or like basically when they're not working, they do that. So there's absolutely no reason to reinforce it in a school setting. You actually need to reinforce local featural abstract reasoning.
Yeah, it's very. And the thing, and on top of that, like, you know, the concepts that I learned, my undergrad was a little different because, like, Carolina has a big emphasis on, like, you know, I didn't get my special ed degree in undergrad, but, like, everybody took a special ed class every semester. Like, it was just like your special ed practical, like, whatever. I don't know what they called it. Whatever the fuck they called it. And so these ideas of, like, you know, universal design and like if it's good for kids with like concerns, it's good for everyone.
Yes.
It turns out.
Yep.
And so, you know, like everybody can use a ramp now. You know what I mean? Like then you've included everyone. Like nobody is like it's very frustrating to watch. But I understand now, like at the time, what I thought was happening was that my job was to help kids learn how to think and like innovate and think critically. But it's absolutely not. Like in no way, shape, or form is that my job. And so that's what I think we have to get real about and decide as a culture, like, is my job just to like, because really, okay, like here's my theory, and I don't know if this is like dumb, but my thinking is like, right, like the way we think of public education now is only something that has been in existence since the Industrial Revolution and labor laws. So, you know, school, it serves two purposes. One is childcare.
Yep. So
the adults can go to work because they can't rely on the children that they used to employ. And second, to desensitize children to said capitalism so that they can then like easily join the workforce when done with school. Like I don't think there's any other reason for it. Like public education serves no other purpose, I don't think. Like wasn't meant to, right? And so when people are like, oh, the system is broken, the system is not broken. The system is working exactly the way it was designed.
Right.
Exactly. You get used to being gone 8 hours a day. You get used to taking, you know, not having, like following really stupid rules. You're used to conforming your behavior to the like desires of your boss. Like you're getting used to deadlines. You're getting used to, you know, whatever. Like it's not at all to prepare kids for the quote unquote real world, which is also a nonsense term.
Yes, we were in the real world the whole time. Like, you're just
always in the real world. Sorry.
Yeah, yep.
This is all the real world.
When you're younger, you need to basically have adults protecting you from boundaries that you can't have yet because you don't understand what the fuck is going on. So you can't say this is okay and this isn't okay. Like, that's adults need to do that. Your brain is not there yet. So, but that doesn't mean you aren't in the real world having real consequences.
It's wild. Like, let's say in the quote unquote real world, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would have Google, but you know, in the real world, I would have a calculator. In the real world, like, you know, if I didn't know how to do something, I would just look it the fuck up and move on.
Right.
So the idea that, like, what you mean by the real world is a job, you just mean you're getting them ready to have a job.
Right.
That's what you...
Right.
And I didn't sign up to be anybody's boss.
Yeah.
And so that's what really hurts me about, you know, what we're doing. I didn't sign up to teach people how to have a boss.
That's wild to me because I want to point something out that's quite weird now that you are saying that. So women are excluded from those positions. And then you have women basically as pseudo bosses. Like a pageantry sort of like version of it where
like a nurse boss.
Yeah.
Nurturing boss.
Right. But then how interesting. But then because we do have misogyny, right? Where it's like there's this weird dynamic sometimes with boys and their teacher too, where
it's
like
so weird.
Yeah, right? And like even what you see online with like male online culture, I don't know what else to call it, right? Where it's like 4chan, whatever. And it's infected everybody's vocabulary at this point, even though it's incredibly silly and stupid and shouldn't be taken seriously. It's just overwhelming when guys have this much power and they have stupid ideas. It goes everywhere. So, but it's like you have to think like how did they get all the resentment isn't just towards their mom.
No.
And I've heard men say stuff about like how they felt about their teachers and stuff like that, and it's very weird and uncomfortable and creepy. And you can look it up right now. You can find a bunch of posts about that too. About like did they feel that they should be? It's so weird. Anyways, I'm not gonna touch that with like a bajillion foot poll today because that's a whole unanswered set of questions that I didn't realize were there.
Yeah, it's wild, and it's also like I think the real reason that there's a big difference between like schools in wealthy areas and schools in like poor areas, like also like rich schools, they're teaching you to be the boss, so you get those freedoms. They're like, well, you're gonna have to, you know, you're gonna actually be in charge.
Right.
So, like, we have to really try with you. I mean, that's not really the plan, sir. Like, and so it's just, you know, like, and then there's this idea that, like, you know, it's sort of like what we do as women with daughters. Like, you don't want them to have to be so vigilant, right?
Yeah.
But you cannot have them be oblivious to the threat. So like, yes, you have to be like, that skirt is too short. Right. You know, like, it shouldn't be, but it is. So like, you know what I mean? And it's just a weird, and I think that comes in a lot into play with like parents who have parents of color, you know, who like, look, man, like you gotta treat white people like that. Like, we shouldn't, we don't, you know, but you kind of have to. Right. You know, so you teach them these, like, it's like a safety skill, and then at one point is that, can you ever really dismantle that if the threat is still there? Like, that's just, you know, so whose job is this to, and so until we, like, unless we just completely redid the whole fucking thing, the whole system, you know what I mean? Like, there's just, I don't see a way, at least for me personally, to be effective in a traditional, like, I don't know, like, educational environment. I just can't do it.
Yep.
I suck.
It's
Like,
it's striking to me that like I did not go to a traditional environment, and that's starting to like hit me harder and harder and harder. That maybe like part of the combination that I got to benefit the most from was autistic girl at the time. Nobody was going to notice us, right? But also like nobody
Right.
was going to stop me, and unless if I was in a traditional environment, then I was probably going to have a lot more problems than I shudder to think what would have happened if I went to a traditional school, to be really honest. Like, I think that it was far from ideal. Like, I still got bullied. Like, there's no stopping that, because it wasn't just autistic kids. It was mostly not, but just kids with different learning disabilities and issues, and some people with conduct issues, right? So I did have a chance to see how people treat me, but I also didn't have any of the authority figures stopping me. They interpreted me in ways that were not very helpful, that I think autistic girls will generally be interpreted. But there was nobody like worried about correcting my behavior that much, because I could fly under the radar of like, you can't act like that. There was so much going on around me, and the attitude just wasn't that. And it was a school run by a woman who is pretty non-conforming herself, so there was nobody being like, well, that's going to be a problem. I grew up in a weird ass city, and I'm still there, and I love it here, but all of those factors, I'm like, oh, this is just a miracle that I didn't have more of myself like kicked in as a kid.
I mean,
California privilege a little bit there, Jane.
Yeah. No, well, yeah, like, I mean, it gives me a lot to think about, because then it's like, how much of that can I distill and then use as a standard, that like anything that I am involved in, I'm like, okay, this is how we're treating people like this, and if I see anything that violates that, I can say no, because that's not how I was treated, and it gave me resilience. And I don't think we're in a situation where things are going to be easy. Anyone who wants to like be like super revolutionary about what's going to happen for autism, it's not going to be easy. There's no way. There's many reasons why, but just don't have that expectation. But what you could do is like fortify the individual person. And that's interesting to me, because I'm like, I feel like I got a lot of that because of how things like kind of like fortuitously coincided with my education.
And I think you really have to have both sides of it. I think that like, just in, like we were talking about how like, we are the kind of the idea people, but we're not the like, okay, so now how does that work people?
Right.
Like I think like in that kind of situation, it helps to have like, like I think like I would need to be reminded of like, hey, so like doesn't have to completely, like I didn't get all that, and I'm, my life is not, none of our lives are great, but like, I'm all right.
Right.
And then for maybe somebody like me to be like, no, man, like this is. Remember how I was explaining to you like how we teach opposites, and you were like, holy shit.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? To be like, oh no, this is what they're hearing. This is just what they have. Like they don't know. And I think like we have to start reaching out to like, or finding, I don't know a way to find that, but like it'd be great to be able to find the counterbalance. Like obviously not completely different, because we're like almost the same person, but like, with that balancing perspective, so it doesn't go all one wonky one way or the other,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and and it's like the perspectives that we're getting to have given us a different like tool. I think the thing that I ended up with, and it's fascinating to me, because as barriers to me understanding what's going on around me, like when things have been obfuscated due to, I think, negligence, like I couldn't get the information.
Mhm.
That has impacted my self-esteem, right? But then as soon as the barrier
Yeah.
is gone, I really do bounce back pretty hard. And I'm like, okay, that has to be what being in that school did for me, is it told me
Mhm.
that the way that I am thinking, I just need to confirm it somehow with the outside world that I'm not like delusional. And then
Right.
I can have confidence. And only leaving that room for doubt is like in and of itself a conscientious thing to do.
Mhm.
So if I can't get confirmation from external confirmation of what I'm saying, believing, proposing, that's an issue. That's a serious issue, and it has to be explained. And rather than picking the explanation that's flattering to me, I'm allowing time for recursiveness to emerge. And once that's there, and I feel like, no, I know that I've got enough, I'm like, fine, let's go. And it's just like, it's really nice that that's there, and that's what I want more of us to have, which gets into this motivation thing, which gets into how do I get all of us to notice we don't do doing as arriving. Like, we just don't. And if we beat ourselves up for not doing that, it's not even a goal. It's not even a thing within our conceptual universe. It's just we've memorized this idea that we get yelled at as like the thing that stops us from getting to actually be motivated. Like, I have to pretend that I'm motivated by stuff that my brain doesn't understand in order to have access to my actual motivation, my actual ability to do things, because money, because status.
Right. Yeah, it's really unfortunate, like, I think too, to see just how much progress is the goals we write or the data that we collect is like progress towards what exactly?
Yeah.
Like, they don't bother other people. I mean, okay, sure, like, you have to know how your behavior, affects others. I'm not saying like do whatever the fuck and it's fine. I'm not, but like, how unobtrusive you can be to the people around, like, that's weird.
It's
Like, I don't
weird.
know.
Yeah. It's not a goal that anybody else has either. Like, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. It's just basically saying, like, don't let them catch you being disabled. Like, that's a crazy way to
Yeah.
suggest a person
Don't be
handles being
weird.
disabled. Yeah, because it's, again, like, I think one of the things that shares the most features with us is actually congenital blindness. So can you imagine if that's what you said to congenitally blind people, that we just can't know that you're congenitally blind? Like, just make sure that
Yeah.
nobody knows. Or even if they don't care if you are or not, make sure that you don't do something a congenitally blind person would do in this field full of people who can see. Make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
Like, that's what's happening to us.
Don't ask them to do anything different based on the fact that you can't see anything.
Yes, exactly. And even when it would help them, it would help people to know that there are two systems of doing. It would help them to know, because the things that they're currently doing, it's blended, but it's not intentional. And people think they're doing as building when they're just doing as arriving. They don't confuse it the other way around, because frankly they do way too much doing as arriving. So they're fooling themselves. And they even say, like, doing as arriving metaphors when it should be doing as building metaphors. I'm like, well, that's why none of your resolutions are happening for New Year's, bro. You just made a nonsensical statement.
Easy.
Yeah.
I just figured it out. I fixed everything for you.
Right.
And they're like, please don't. I'm like, what? Why are you? Okay.
Because well, we couldn't have fixed it all, because we're supposed to have money status, and we have to be likable in a specific way, and yada 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 yada. Like, it's all this like, but you have to arrive here or we won't listen to you yet. I'm like, well, I'm never going to arrive anywhere because I can't fucking see anything, and I don't care, and also you're doing it too much. Also, like, even if I could, I don't want to at this point, because of the amount of resentment I feel and anger that this is being used instead of what actually needs to happen, because it's rewarding and satisfying for people that can use it. Like, they're basically just they're just making themselves high on their own supply.
Yeah, it's really wild to me. I just thought I had to say right words. And I just kept saying words at them, thinking like, okay, fine. Not those words. Okay, try these words.
Yep.
Does that make you understand that I'm right? And they're like, no, that makes me hate you more. I'm like, what? Why?
Well, and then sometimes it won't, right? But that's because you accidentally did something relevant to the global configurational stuff. Like, that's the whole thing. It's like, we'll say something and everyone bursts into laughter because it was the funniest thing, apparently, if we could see what the fuck is going on. But we can't. So it's like, okay, I don't know why you like that one.
I stumble into being hilarious a lot.
Right.
But I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right. Because it just so happens that the local featural thing that we're talking about at that precise moment is funny in a global configurational context, and that's it. Like, that's all that happened there. And we can't rely on the, aligning of the fucking solar eclipse to communicate with other people.
No. And I'm kind of like, I don't know. I know that, like, this is not, like, reasonable, but I'm just tired of trying.
Yep.
I'm tired.
Yep.
Tired.
Yep.
I'm exhausted.
Yep.
Like, and if I didn't, like, it is the only reason that I have to continue to care is money. And that is fucking enraging to me.
Yep.
On a regular basis.
Yep.
Literally all the time.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so this is perfect. So this is getting into the whole motivation thing, and like, why do we keep trying? What are we keep trying to do? Like, what is happening here? So on the horizon is something that will work for us because we have reality on our side. Whereas somebody who just is going kind of mad with power and global configurational navigational stuff that they're doing, like they're negotiating that with other people, getting to go where they want to go so other people get to go where they want to go, even though they don't know why they want to go there anymore, besides just like, my brain makes me happy for going there. I'm being really honest and a little bit cruel, but honestly, someone needs to have a wake-up call that that's clearly what's happening. Look at the entire internet, for God's sakes. That's clearly what's happening. So, okay, that doesn't mean people can't do better than that. It means that they're fooling themselves. So there's going to be some outrage over how our lives lack profundity, and that we're using profundity, like profound people in history, as like our linchpins, when most of what those people said was nonsense. Most of what they said was nonsense. It's not to say that there wasn't an idea that had a useful aspect that then gets moved into a new category of ideas that then generates more ideas. It's not that that didn't happen, but the majority of their reasoning was nonsense. You can observe reality many, many, many times in a row and be able to create a consistent response that you organized and engineered, yada yada, but you may not be able to explain it. So that's the boat that we're in right now. So we can be the ones who make up a profound explanation that is way more probable. We're still making it up, so chill, but we're still going to get way more accurate. And so, the system that we have right now at some point is going to make people feel like their lives are meaningless. And it's already that's what the nihilism is. They just feel that their lives are meaningless because they're not getting to contribute to the obviously ongoing elaboration of complexity. Like, complexity is happening, meaning is increasing, and we're not getting to feel that we're participating in it, even though we are. But unfortunately, we're not getting to pay attention to it, because once you have to pay attention to global configurational and everyone has their weird social reality and they're making up the rules just to get the hit, then yeah, you wouldn't feel that you're participating in the meaning making, because you don't get to talk about it with anybody. You're talking about the nonsense on top. You're talking about the emperor's new clothes. You're not talking about what we've learned so far about the brain and what's a better model of human behavior. And for anybody at this point to respond with ideas that are crowdsourced, it's just a bad idea. Don't do that. Find the weirdos that have to use this new technology to build.
Like, all your ideas should come from weirdos.
Correct. Especially now. Because,
like, also, we have the biggest stakes in it.
Yeah.
Like, are, you know, in a way that is different from most of you. Like,
Can you repeat
I'm
that
way
last
more
sentence?
motivated for this to work.
I lost that last sentence.
Like, I'm way more motivated for this to work than a
Mhm.
lot of other people. So,
Mhm.
like, definitely let me do it.
We're motivated because it's like we have this sense that working is possible, that functioning in a way that the universe agrees with is possible, because we've inferred this, because we've been doing local featural, and this has been implied by everything that has suggested the universe that we are in is most likely this model, right? So everything around us is confirming that this must be possible. So we want to see it. We will long to see it, and we've never felt it. You know, like, I need things to make sense because my brain has a model where it does, and then I absolutely need people to stop playing their stupid game where they just make up the rules. They're just like, oh, well, we don't want you to make sense. We're going to say that this makes sense instead. And they'll say globbity blobbity bloop, right? That they just pulled out of their butthole, which is insulting to our work, might I add. So they'll pull something out of their butthole, and then 10,000 people agree with them because 10,000 people knew that it was important globally configurationally, to do that. And so then you have another proliferation of a stupid social meme.
I mean, and I would also say this, like, at the end of the day, like, people are, I think, just really fucking scared.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the issue is control. That's the issue for everyone. Everybody. You want to be because ultimately we can't control anything. And that's a really fucking scary place to be, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But, like, I'd rather work in that reality, right, than struggle against the current.
Right. And rely on influencers. Like, influencing is just like telling people, hey, believe that this is real, right? Even though there may be no good reason for you to believe that it's real, except that I as the person telling you, have these global configurational trophies, right? I have my little badges of, like, listen to me. So you think, basically people are saying, like, I'll listen to you because I'll believe that you traveled that distance and know what's there, and you're telling me what's really there. And that's get rich quick schemes. That's everybody who's a motivational speaker minus probably 2 people. Like, that's all of that shit. And that's influencers as well. So at some point we're going to sour to this because it's clearly people bullshitting you, which we don't like. But what is it to bullshit? Well, it's to not build anything, because you can just pretend that you can do that if needed, and instead say, I don't understand this at all. The idea that, like, somebody who would be good at building is also the person that has arrived at these global configurational trophy, like, finishing lines. Why would that be true when everybody makes up how you get the awards? People just make it up.
I think that we need to feel, and I don't know where this comes from. This could be just some kind of, like, I don't know, thing that all humans are going to do because it's a survival. I don't know, right? Like, this may be something that's just, like, there's nothing we can do about this. But, like, people will really, really want to feel like somebody, or, like, has power. And they don't. Like, you know, or that there's any kind of absolute rule.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like, that this is bad, and these are the people that will protect me from bad, or this is how I can be protected from the bad thing. Like, you just can't, man. Like, everything is made up. We're just human, like, we're all just making this shit up.
Hi!
Oh, sorry, I just got in, and I'm like, oh, are we talking about, like, the abusive power structures that are baked into every system of thought that humanity has?
Yeah, we are. We're deconstructing it. Because you know what it is? It's
Wow.
It's global
Yes.
configurational reasoning and a poor understanding of what math should be, where some people think math is what we think it is, which is abstractions and containment
Yes.
and objects.
And they think of it as Platonic ideals.
Correct. That you get
I was
closer or
just
further from.
thinking about the reason that somebody separates into parts, which is a thing that every human does, right? Within ourselves, we separate off these parts. And some people are so traumatized or have such an intense, ingrained desire or need because of trauma to keep that separation very separate that it comes out in the form of what we call DID or plurality or whatever. But that is just like in the realm of the natural, normal distribution of humans and the way we have parts internally, right? Yep. It's a far outlier, but that is still normal. Anything on the bell curve, right, is normal. And it has to be completely off of that to become abnormal, right? Or, right, it might be typical, but it is normal.
Right.
So the reason this happens, I think, or at least this is the reason I'm happening with autistic people, is that you, for your personal safety, have been required to treat something that is clearly not recursive about reality as though it were recursive about reality.
Yes.
And to do this, you have to segment parts of yourself off that are able to view reality properly, whatever it is about you that is viewing what these other people who have power or putting you in danger around you believe that is endangering you. Right. Because you can't leave, you have to separate that off to appease them and act as though you couldn't tell that, like, empathy and being nice to people shouldn't be the default, or that children aren't the property of their parents, or that women aren't, landscape.
Right.
The fact that women are the same type of objects that all humans are.
Yes.
We call people.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
Or that, skin color correlates with mental abilities, right? Or that even the entire way that we talk about the value of people, the intrinsic value that we talk about it is a fucked up system of oppression innate to the way we talk about things like that, right? There's a reason that dumb is a word that means I don't like this person, right? That's what it means colloquially. And first it was somebody who can't talk, right? It was a term trying to describe somebody's disability. They didn't have the ability to talk the way others did, right? And then it became generalized into a way to insult people, right? Through linguistic drift. Hi, I'm practicing first letting out my actual emotions that were crunched tinily inside myself, and I wasn't allowed to even imagine I might have them by my, there's a specific term for this that I came across, by my introjection of the opinions of the society that I live in, right? I was able to create a personality construct or a thought construct inside myself to inhabit this theoretical space about non-real recursiveness, and then put that in charge of myself and told it to make sure the other parts of myself never showed their face where anyone else could see them, right? And I was a child and I had no control over where other people could see me. So I had to do it everywhere. And then I was what they call a genius, but what I call particularly aimed at and thus growing in power and ability like a growing muscle over time as practiced, used, and refined, have an intellect that is precise, sharp, accurate, and generally useful. And thus, at far too early an age, and continually for my whole life, I was able to see the ways that our society destroys all kinds of categories of people all the time. And for my own safety, even though my family was, within the context of life, an incredibly supportive, wonderful family with parents I love and who never, did a thing to intentionally harm me in their life, I understood reality enough that I could read the culture through their small body changes, through their small linguistic uses. I don't have bad body language. Autistic people have no understanding relative to me. Sorry, not no understanding, but relative to me, basically no understanding of the implications of the way they use words and body language and context. I have more contextual understanding of social situations than they do, and they run their social understanding through what to them is an intuitive use of a part of the brain that doesn't work in my brain, and thus seems like an alien experience that might as well be a psychic power through this intuitive use of fashion to understand social situations. They get a shoddy, rough map that is wrong most of the time, and they simply assume it is correct and move on. And so they are the ones who are clumsy when it comes to having thoughts and doing things on purpose, right? They're not clumsy when it comes to, staying within the norms of what they consider the things people normally do. They can get in lines. They can, exist within a system set up with cues and regulations and pointless nonsense created in the social sphere and internal to human beings.
Well, they
But
believe
they have no.
they believe that
Right,
by
but
engaging with
yeah.
that, they believe by engaging that they'll also have access to the deeper things that we're talking about. They think this is what I think is happening. So it's like they're
Sure.
doing this thing in real time that helps them to negotiate with each other about like,
Right.
okay, what are we all agreeing is going on, and are we all okay with what's going on? So this is like something they're doing in real time, and that takes up a lot of energy, especially if the environment is encouraging more and more and more of it. So when are they going to get to the deeper question of should we be even doing this in the first place? When
They are using heuristics all the time, and it is working to their understanding of reality, and thus they're getting further and further adrift from real answers that aren't simply simple rule of thumbs or short-term approximations. And these become the long-term answer the longer and longer they don't practice the thing that you and I, and people like us, Jade, have to make into our strongest muscle, which is actually thinking everything through and figuring out what is actually being said and should be done and things like that.
Right, and I'll add too, because like Kyle's got some things in the comments, because he's like the resident person who can speak on where autistic people are coming from. Like, what's happening, I think, too, is that they can discuss social contexts in ways that are blended, but they're also not motivated by our culture at large to pay greater weight to the building thing. Like, what's the implications of what we're doing? That's not rewarded. It's not necessarily that people don't value it or take time to do it, but there's no like, oh, thank goodness you're doing that. Like, that doesn't get you paid or other rewards that I don't get to experience as an autistic person.
The systems that they have put into place, right, and the way they engage with those systems both encourage the wrong kind of growth that metastasizes and becomes these cancerous social constructs and cultural constructs, right?
Yeah.
I wonder this though, because let's be honest, the way that we do things is like not good if you're worried about your day-to-day survival. Like, it's not good, right? Like, in the way that
right now with this set of tools that we have. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. I'm working on myself and practicing. Please continue. I'm going to take notes about what I want to say. You have a turn. Thank you.
like not good, but I mean, like, so, you know, like I see this a lot with the kids, like, you know, there's this, a lot of them like don't understand when people are, let's say, like making fun of them, because they're just assuming like, why would you do that? That's stupid. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? Like, and it doesn't make any sense, you know? And it's like a healthy dose of fear, or like being present in your body, that is in some ways, not so much now, right? But I think historically, like a more helpful skill, right, to survive, let's say, day to day, and be more in the, well, I don't know, that doesn't help us get away from this bear. You know, like, that's what I wonder sometimes, is like, how do we meld those two abilities together? Because I do wonder what would happen if just like one or the other was like obliterated.
Well, we're blind. That's
Sure.
why we can't do it. But it's not that like
Right.
people without our disability can't do what we're doing. They just aren't doing it as exclusively. If you do it exclusively, it is a workaround. But the problem is there's nowhere for us to go when we have like these enhanced abilities that's making sense, because it hasn't been understood as playing
Right.
the role that it does in society, because people don't understand there's this split in the first place.
Yeah, and
Sure,
so
sure, I don't think it's
to
been, like,
bring in
capitalized
the
on.
analogous situation is like, if having strong upper body strength allowed you to make better decisions, or like construct more useful theories about how to interact with reality, then it would be nonsensical to not have a way for people who have non-working legs and thus develop very strong upper body strength to use their body strength to improve society, in the way that in this theoretical I'm saying, like, oh, if upper body strength could improve society, right? And it is clear that the way that Jane and I have developed, and people like us, has given us a mental muscle that could be used to vastly improve society, if there was a context and system to take the ideas that we make and implement them. And there is no system, there's no avenue, and in fact, all such potential avenues are actively being destroyed and policed.
They can and do exist, but you need a ton of money to do it. That's the problem.
Yes.
So, and the way you get money is by doing global configurational movements. So it's not that none of this stuff has been invented. It's just that it hasn't been combined on purpose.
Doesn't count. That doesn't count, Jane. That doesn't count. If there's a system where, if you're born the guy who's supposed to have invisible clothes, and it turns out you invent clothes, that doesn't count as there being a system in place that allows people to invent clothes.
Right.
The system in place is that everyone has to ignore that the guy in charge doesn't have clothes on. And if the guy who happens to get in charge has clothes on, that doesn't mean that was addressed within the system.
No. Yeah, no. I'm not trying to say that is. Well, what I was trying to point out is that when we're talking about it not existing, so it hasn't been built, but parts of it have been built, because this is also part of how everybody works. So I want to emphasize that, like, everyone needs to know that everybody benefits from using building as doing, and we have to use it, so that there are ways that this could be repurposed and resituated, but we currently don't have a way to do that.
To explain, right? Sorry. I'm allowing myself. I'm going through a whole thing that basically is just like high level, high difficulty unmasking, right? The whole plurality thing I have is that I was so deeply masked in so many layers through my life that it is a incredibly complex thing that I'm moving through. And so I'm learning how to choose my own boundaries about things that I was told were boundaries were, like finding a way to put my own needs first sometime. And I have an intense need to explain that just because parts that could be used to cause something to exist in the future doesn't, like I was correct to say it doesn't exist. you're saying that it could exist, or
Well,
the potential exists,
I'm
and that
arguing
it's
for
even
some.
partially built.
Yeah,
for
I'm
something.
arguing for something
but,
more
yeah.
intentional than that. So I want to make it clear that like sometimes people are organizing what they're doing by building, and by that happening at all, you start to want it to make sense. So I'm saying that like even when you see people trying to organize political, that could be a feeble attempt to assemble what actually needs to exist in order for simple solutions to be readily available. Like we have a sense of that. But then what
Yes.
people walk in and say is that, oh, you don't understand because you haven't reached this hierarchical position. You don't get to have that critique, right? So it's getting thwarted actively by the
Right.
culture, and
Right,
that there are things we've built that we don't get to appreciate because the barrier to being able to actually put it all together is being gate-kept by hierarchical people or global
I think
configurational.
specifically, like you mentioned hierarchy, and I think that can be centered as the thing that is getting in the way, right? I think that humans have a natural desire for justice. They have a natural desire to help each other unless they are become in dire need or become antisocial, right? Naturally, humans are pro-social. In some situations, some of us are antisocial, but it is not within the norm. It is absolutely an outlier, right? And the hierarchy is just a system that came about somehow, and the way it interacts with the doing as arriving and the setting things up through the coordinate and configurational system that first comes about so we could understand the landscape. It makes it so that people latch onto this hierarchy, and it's become a very entrenched problem because people attach a fixed mindset to reality and math, right? They're thinking about reality and the wrong math about this is what life is. And so once I get an opinion from someone in the hierarchy, who's valued by the hierarchy, I simply take that opinion and don't change it. And then when I try to help people, I do it from this position and from these facts that I don't need to ever think about or change to be able to help people better, because they don't actively seek and develop a need to conform to reality and a reality quest.
Well, hierarchy is like, it's like a prime metaphor. So like humans with global configurational reasoning will make the metaphor of hierarchy. The way that we have messed this up is by not asking what it actually means. And it's our ability to know, like, theory of mind to an extent, that we have human minds, that we share commonalities so we can learn from each other, But it could also be like, computer software. It could be something that's inanimate. But we are able to know that something has arrived somewhere before us. And that's basically hierarchy.
Oh, right. So hierarchy, right, is right. Hierarchy is the order that things arrived.
Yeah.
And so we, of course, can't do hierarchy properly because we have place cells non-functional. But other people have somehow come to the situation where hierarchy, right, first in, has become the signifier of most true.
Mm-hmm. Most reliable too.
Right? They've tied it to recursion, right?
Yeah.
Whatever came first, it's just straight up. Whatever's highest on the hierarchy that you as an individual value most, the most recursive hierarchy, you treat whoever's at the top of that as the most recursive. This is their model of recursiveness. People fall into because they have a choice of models of recursiveness. Well, we can only build one model of recursiveness. Right. Well, and so they are using the heuristic model of recursiveness, where you value hierarchy and use people's hierarchical value to value their opinions instead of reality testing everything, which takes more energy and is more difficult to use for everything, sort of like what Lauren was saying.
And what I'm saying too is that we're talking to, so people with autism and without autism are talking to each other, not realizing we have really different concepts because of how our brains formed. So if somebody's saying, like, let's give an example of like Bob Iger, right? So he would be somebody considered top of a hierarchy, and any hierarchy, I insist people just plop it down on the ground, so there's no top anymore. It's just far, right? So when we say top, because we're embodied and the sky is really far away from us, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's pretty simple metaphor here. So okay.
And so
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh no,
I just want to highlight this. Suddenly contextualizes why people have the relationship to their own intelligence that they do, is because it's within the context of hierarchy and distance, right? So if you consider someone to be far smarter than you are, very far away, like you can't imagine the distance for you and your intelligence to travel to how you view their intelligence, then that farness becomes high value. And you're like, oh, okay, I need to treat the person in this hierarchy of intelligence because I wish I was more like them. So I'll value what they have to say.
But that's not, but intelligence is actually like doing is building. So intelligence is actually a probabilistic guess of how likely it is that you would do it correctly versus them. If they have so much experience and they understand the model and they're able to do this thing, they're intelligent at a thing, then the probability of them doing it correctly or to certain criteria is incredibly higher than you. So that's how you can actually measure that.
Which requires, a cultivation of an understanding of abstraction, which is the most useful portion of math when it comes to thinking about reality. But our school systems have a focus on math, on, very specific number crunching, and also, people are forced to go through the system.
So, right.
Get them an anger at math, and it can also give them an unhealthy avoidance of things like abstraction.
Right.
It becomes like even trauma-based. Right.
Oh, and then I'm not sure about that point, so but I also wanted to pop back on something. So the Bob Iger
example. I've been doing research on trauma-based stuff.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So Bob Iger, right? So somebody would say that he's like at a top of a hierarchy, or like Jeffrey Bezos. How I hear that, however, is what is the probability that I will ever see this person in my lifetime, and yet I still need to know about them all the time? That's how I experience that. Extremely low probability I'll ever like talk to Bob Iger or freaking what's his duck. Like the probability of them knowing I exist versus me knowing them exist is like, clearly already established, and also there's all these other factors. So I'm weighing in like, okay, what is the world pay attention to or treat as recursive? And then I start to analyze, and that's why I like post-structural analysis. Okay, do they deserve that? And then my answer is no, right? Like the value of this person, no. And like, how likely is it that they know something wonderfully insightful, or how likely is it that they just know kind of like group speak, in-speak, lexicon, inner ring stuff from their position in society as it currently stands? The latter is infinitely more likely, and is again, because I'm inferring based on the objects that I'm analyzing, that's basically what it is. So then when somebody says, oh, you're just not close enough to them to know their secret, smart, wonderful inner workings of their brilliant genius mind, I'm like, that's just not the world we most likely live in. That's silly. But that's more of the emperor has no clothes, that he must have arrived at that place, therefore he must know these esoteric things, when he doesn't. He doesn't know them. He doesn't. Okay? So that's true. I've talked to people who are the types. Who I know what they know, and basically, and it's not very impressive.
Because that's an understood human bias. It is the bias to assume that the universe must make sense. Right?
Well,
so if you understand that there's a system where if there's a system, well, we do. It's just it's a complicated system.
Our stories are not
describing the way that we make sense. Right?
Yeah, our stories are not mandated to make sense. Yeah, like if you're interested in finding the sense is being made because that's what time is. Time is sense. Time is meaning and things, the sense of things increasing over time in complexity. Like over time, it's just complexity. So if we can experience that's cool.
The things we believe and the things that we say and the things that people interpret from what we say, none of these are guaranteed to be sensical, right? But they do exist within the realm that reality makes sense, and there is a sensible explanation for why people believe things, why they say things, why you interpret them.
How we believe is possible. the things we believe may not strictly be possible. Like we can believe, it is possible for us to believe impossible things, and that's just because we can have. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
That statement sort of summarizes the, the non-argument that we just had, where we noticed a lack of clarity in a certain set of language.
Right.
In that sentence, right? It's possible for us to believe impossible things. Explains the way language there can be muddied.
So, and then that gets back to my thing, is like, for autistic people, there is something possible for us, and I think what messes us up is that non-autistic people can get mad about it being possible and intentionally make up a social game to then say, haha, it is impossible, right? Like, our hierarchies do matter, whatever, yada yada yada. You don't matter. So there's like this threat, and I don't know how to talk about it too much more clearly than that. I'd have to work this out in real time. But basically, I know that I need certain things to be successful as a person, healthy, whatever. And I know those things are possible and it would in fact be beneficial to realize, not only for me, but for other people. But even attempting to suggest that would violate hierarchies that I'm vaguely conscious of, like I don't really understand it. And it would put me in the position where if people want to attack me, which they may, that's what's going to happen, and it's going to overtake any effort from me. And it's also alarming, because then it's like, well, will they just be mad that I'm a girl doing this? Like, what will the motivate? Do I need to know the motivation of people that I don't understand their motivation? Like, I don't experience that form of doing as arriving. That's where motivation comes from. I experience motivation as doing as building.
Our social realities create restrictions on access to resources that are otherwise available. They're only unavailable because of the realities of the social reality that has been built, and how this causes humans to act because of their belief systems, which are in their brains physically, but are not outside the human brain part of the reality of the world.
And the weird thing about it is, on some conscious level, I'm also able to say, like, okay, it's extremely improbable that somebody with some stockpiling of resources would stop by this, hear me talking, and then be like, oh shit, let me give this person the things they need that they can't get to, which are specifically going to be, unfortunately, money and ability to be taken seriously. So it's like all this hierarchical stuff. So I could elicit that response from somebody. I know that's possible, but also what a bizarre thought to have. I don't even know how I would begin to communicate that in a way that's digestible to people who don't know a lot about what I'm talking about, or share some brain features.
A bizarre thought, which is interesting if that's the correct language, because what it is the most likely way for you to get access to the resources that you need to help yourself and others. Right. That thing you described, you're like, that's the most likely thing that's going to happen. Is that a miracle will happen.
Yeah.
Unlikely that if it happened, you wouldn't believe it, and wouldn't believe it for a while as you continue to reality check it, because the chance of it occurring was so astronomically small as to be miraculous. Right?
Yeah, I feel it's bizarre in the sense that irony is bizarre. It's like, this is not how it would be ideal, and idealism. This is not great. Like it's just like, well, that's an unfortunate symmetry. like that the world can produce something like what I'm do. Like, okay, the world produced me. I didn't produce myself. Okay. You rely on...
Wait, so you use such an excellent word, because bizarre means fantastical, odd, grotesque.
Right.
So this is a thing that is odd, literally against the odds, and unlikely, odd, and grotesque, and fantastical, in that it feels like we're in hell, and that happening would feel like a literal miracle. Right?
Yeah.
Bizarre was excellent word choice.
Thank you. Yeah. So it'd be like, at a certain point.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
From the Italian bizzarro, meaning irascible and tending to quick flashes of anger. So it's even further saying a thing that is so odd grotesque and fantastical that it makes you angry suddenly when you spot it.
Yeah.
It is truly bizarre. It is bizarro.
Yeah, exactly. So I elicits in me this odd feeling that I think that encapsulates as well. But the only reason I know that is because that word encoded in some way that felt useful as a building, apparatus. So thank you for doing that. But like even just the concept of like, this is juxtaposed in a way that it feels like, okay, this is being held in some sort of uneven, teetering balance. And if only it could just fall. Because I know what's happening right now is unique via, hi, we're talking on the internet, this is crazy, right? Like, that's new. So there's lots of ways that this could have toppled in small senses, but maybe there's like a larger way that this could happen. So then I kind of just wander around like, is that possible? Or is that like how likely? Well, it is possible, but like, what's the probability that I live in? And it's just so strange to have this brain. It's strange, bizarre. It's uncanny, I guess, to have the brain that can calculate the probability because it has to, because of the disability. So once I have that ability, then I have to use it to check the probability of me being able to solve how my species is dealing with probability. Like, this is a little bit sad.
Uncanny, both because the social reality that we understand very well states that we are an impossibility, and uncanny because even the reality as far as we understand it, says that people like us should be vanishingly rare.
Right.
So being that person is truly an uncanny experience.
Yes.
The idea that you are one of the most uniquely suited human beings on the planet to solve a massive global apocalypse scale issue just because of who you were born as. This is the myth of the hero. We are told that this is who we're supposed to be, but we're also told that we will never ever be this person. Right? Because it has been mythologized as the chosen one, which is a dualist false construction.
Yeah.
Right? It is separating from the reality that statistically there will be a chosen one. You instead are being told that it is purely fantastical and outside the realm of reality for a chosen one to even exist. When no, math says someone will always, there's always a person most suited to solve a problem that exists.
Michael Phelps.
That is simply a simple fact, right?
Yeah. Michael Phelps is a really good example. Go ahead, though. Yeah.
Can I take a crack at this?
Go for it.
So, I think that I compare this to a conversation that like came up while I was on the playground one day, which is odd. I was on the playground and we were talking about whether this kid was kosher or not, right? And they said he was, and then I was like, I asked him if he'd ever had a cheeseburger, and he said yes, and I said, the kid's not kosher, right? Like, it's basic kosher. Don't do that. And I was like, I know, I get it, it's not different right now, but like at the end of the day, like, these are just rules I think that people noticed, right? Like, oh, that person, when they eat blah, 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 they tend to get sick. Right? Or these things tend to cause people to be ill, right? And in because of the place in which, the place of science at the time, like, of course, like, you don't have refrigeration, you don't have like preservative, right? So like many foods were unsafe, and instead of like, hey, maybe there's some like scientific thing, and that's hard, right? We don't have the skills for it. Like, how would we even go about figuring that out? How would we keep ourselves safe in the meantime, right? It is, nope, those things are against God. God said no, right? And so that's a lot easier. That's like a blanket, like, I don't know, man, it's just God said no.
And God is
What are you gonna do about that, right?
God is a parent myth as well, right? God the Father.
Is a parent myth, right?
Dad said
So
no. I don't know.
so-
We trust
right.
Dad.
So
You know.
so that
And, like-
would first come from a parent that is busy right now and needs the person to simply follow authority in this moment, right?
Just
And
stay
because we
safe.
didn't establish this idea that like right now authority is important, we simply say authority is important all the time. I said so. And then when that's not
Well-
good enough, you say the sky dad said so, right? You say God said so. Because
Well,
they
here's
know
the
it's true.
problem.
And so they just need to communicate it quickly sometimes, and then it can become encodified. Sorry, you continue.
Like, no, you're good. So, you know, and I'm standing on the playground. Like, one of these chicks is like my age, right? She graduated like the year before me, and she was like, yeah, haha, you know, kind of like, oh yeah, okay. But you know, it's still God and religion, and I don't know, you know, like just kind of, and kind of blew it off. And like the other lady, who's much older, right, and organizes things like Roots for the Fruit at my school, which I don't participate in, was like, yeah, and that's why you don't see any of that in the New Testament. And I was like, no, that's not right. What?
What?
No. But I think, like, if you think about absolute deconstruction of her whole world, right, has to happen
Mhm.
in order for all of that to be true, right? Right? If you or you have dedicated your life, essentially, right, to this understanding and this construct and this way of conceptualizing things, I am the threat.
Mhm.
I'm a threat,
Correct.
right? Because that is fucking frightening. And I understand that. Right? Like, so I think
Well, you're not just the threat. You've been a threat. Realize that you haven't acted on people that you wanted the best for, like the people that you love the best.
Right,
You did
exactly,
stuff too
yes.
based on this. Yeah.
Yes. And so I you know, I'm trying to
Sorry, very quickly. I heard that you became the threat sometimes. I missed the sentence before that. Right, the
Well, just
lady was
like
talking about, you know, they do this in the New Testament. What happened next?
yeah, like kind of like, oh, you know, she basically equated like the whole thing to
Mhm.
well, but Christianity is still true. Like that's what she
Right.
needed to do, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
to protect herself, protect her sense of self. And I think
Sense
what
of
we have
safety
to
too.
figure out, yeah, exactly.
Right,
What
right.
we have to
And so,
figure out is a
so either
way
way,
to
sorry, Lauren.
Oh wait,
just-
wait. Let
it's safety whether you believe it or whether you need to believe it. It's safety either way. Sorry, Lauren. Continue.
well, my thought is like, as autistic people, or as people who have come to this realization, and I think you and I were kind of talking about this, like on the Discord a couple days ago, sort of in tangent, like, you know, we have to figure out a way to make that feel safe to people, right? Like we have to figure, because we're coming in, we are destroying these people's worlds.
Right.
When you tell them, like, the cops are not going to protect you, like the government is not going to protect you, this institution
Reason.
is
Yeah,
actually just nothing, because it's just people, and we all are meaningless. Do you know what I mean? Like individually. So
my understanding,
collective will not save you.
I got to take a turn. Sorry, are you done?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Can I speak now? I want to take turns, but I don't have the tools right now. But what I'm saying is that I am getting into spiritual alchemy and the study of Jungian psychoanalysis, right? And what you just said about, like, we are coming in destroying these people's worlds, this makes sense with the active understanding of people that is being developed and used by psychology as an institution, that we inhabit to a degree. Like, this is all a metaphor, of course, but it's metaphors are true things. They are things that, if abstracted and applied down on reality from the metaphorical, still is true, right? And so the metaphor that is existent within these archetypes in mythology, these are things that make up people and their ability to look at reality. So when you say that in reality, we are coming in and destroying their inner world, this is true. We are, in reference to them, Loki, right? We are coming in, or the devil, right? We are coming in, and Ragnarok is happening, right? There is a reason that the serpent is giving the fruit of knowledge to people, right? This is literally, like, that myth exists for moments and people like us. I am Loki. I have literally named myself Lilith and Lucifer because this is who I am, is that I am prophesizing the end of the world, but I'm also saying we can then build a world that is close to the false Eden, this false utopia, this false heaven. Actually strive towards building something excellent, and we can do it very well if we just destroy this horrible hell world we're currently inhabiting and which isn't congruent with reality.
Wait, can you hear me? Wait, can you hear me?
No, we could not for a bit, but now we can.
That's weird. Okay, I think I need to have this one feature on. Okay, that's fine. All right. So you were saying something about whether or not something is still true. What was that? It was whether or not they are safe, or they just believe they're safe, that it's true. So I want to walk.
Oh, that was a while ago.
No. Well,
I'm saying they believe it is giving them safety, whether it is for the reason of keeping them safe from what facing real reality would cause others to do them, or that they think it is reality and thus they think it is related to safety. Right. Knowing what reality is a function of safety.
So, and then
safety, or vice versa.
I don't have the best segue because I lost it a little bit, but I know I need to add this point. So, like, whatever we understand is embodied. So, like, every metaphor, that's the thing, like, even just like the truth of the metaphor, that was it. The metaphor is going to be true in an embodied sense. So whatever metaphors we're using will go back to our embodiment. So then what we need to be able to get people to rediscover is their embodiment and how that's what they're actually speaking from, instead of this metaphysical thing that isn't their embodiment.
So when you say embodied, does that mean if somebody believes that they are eventually going to be embodied within heaven, and you are telling them that that's not true, that they are going to be hurt from this? From learning this?
So heaven is just global configurational reasoning. That's just their concept of infinity. That they know that they've been walking for a while. They just imagine that never ends. It has nothing to do with being embodied, and outside of just that you are walking towards something, and they imagine continuing to walk.
Big conversation with Brightspear, and basically, if you define God properly, God is just the place you want to go eventually. aka God is heaven, is a version of the universe where all matter knows and cares for and takes care of all other matter, right? This is what the infinite God would be. That is the most of what a human would want to happen that could possibly happen, right?
Yeah, and then you'll get...
Like, God is the concept of infinite good and good things. And,
it's a temporal...
The infinite on switch.
Yeah, well, then it's temporal metaphor too. I would say that, like, there... So if you said, like, God as a concept of, like, wholeness, of, like, a completion of everything, that's kind of a more new age spiritual thing that people can get behind, and is sometimes in some religions at points and then others less so, because it's not great for, like, making people die. If they're like, why is my death part of the completeness of the universe, you have to, like, convince them of some mystery there that's a little bit weird. So if you think there's a conception of God that's, like, you could use using, like, that, like, think of God as, like, ultimate motivation. Okay, so if you took motivation and dialed it up to a million billion, that's God. and so you can have an object building God, and you can also have a arriving God. So I think that's another thing to note, is that that's a form of motivation.
I think like any infinite point is God because it exists outside of reality, and like innately it exists outside time and reality.
But unfortunately, so
right?
that wouldn't work for us because we have to be contained within. If that violates containment theory,
right?
So it doesn't work.
That definition of a God that I just described is my closest personal approximation to this idea of a God, right? I say, like, imagine if eventually all of reality was trying to take care of people the way I want to, and all of reality knew itself, right? This is the closest towards like my goals and what I would consider a quote unquote end point in time or end goal or something, just so that I could sort of approximately act like that exists and then use it to navigate by in the travel metaphor.
Would you accept my idea that like God is like just an ultimate dialing up of motivation? Like it's basically saying that okay, that's fine.
God is the North Star, right?
Okay.
So you cannot navigate on the ocean the way that you navigate on land, right?
Uh-huh.
So the configurational system that you can do as a non-autistic human being who's not, otherwise impaired, that doesn't work on the ocean. And so we have developed something that can be used as the closest analogy for what you and I, Jane, have to do, right? We say, okay, there's God out there. We set it as the North Star metaphorically. And then we learn to check the North Star often instead of checking time, because we can't check time naturally. That's not working for us. But we do know the thing that we want to do, the work, right? So, God is if the work is accomplished. You've talked about the work, right? So God is the state where the work has been accomplished. Well, so it's your guiding star.
It would be well. Okay, so I'll add a couple things there. So a couple of things need to be added. And then I'm going to talk for a little bit because this is important.
I said God is. I meant to say that we can set a definition like God for a state where we say, look, we treat our North Star, our guiding principle, as the thing we want to accomplish having been accomplished. And using that, we can now navigate featurally instead of through coordinates.
So this is, and now I'm going to go tip over. So embodiment just means that we exist as the organisms that we cellularly are, and that we cannot define anything outside of that, that everything is a concept that emerges from our experience of that, and the physical, actual workings of it within the laws of physics. So that's what embodiment is. So
embodiment is sort of like a post-structural lens to keep in mind about the reality of what we are.
Yeah, right? of what we can even conceive of, like that all concepts are embodied.
Of what we could be in concept space, that all comes from this reality. And so, post-structuralism,
it's inescapable.
You take everything in its context, right? And so this is the inescapable context of being embodied, is those things you said. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. So embodiment, it provides for us radical realism, because the reality is that our embodiment allows us only to speak in certain ways, only to think in certain ways, and anything that is outside of how we are embodied is impossible. So we are all always coming downstream of being embodied as a human in this, and moving as we do, and etc. And things that are just normal to our species are then also how our thoughts are made possible. They have to be downstream of that. So like upstream is our embodiment, downstream is any concepts that we have. So the embodiment is in all of it. So then to say that there's a God, for example, some people will say that all things are possible with God. That is a building metaphor, right? That's a concept of God as helping you to be able to build what you want to build. God as arriving, I think, is more ludicrous and less embodied ultimately, because once something is made possible, another thing becomes possible, because that's the nature of time as we experience it, and we have no concept of living outside of that, or what we call time. The increasing of complexity that is going onwards, and not only forwards, but also influences the complexity, looking back, looking sideways, looking to left, right, up and down and diagonal. Everything as things occur, meaning is intensified because there's references back to other previous meanings and such and so forth. So complexity increasing is the only thing we have ever known and will ever know. And to want that to end is death. So that's why I think that most religions are actually death cults. Like, it's actually a striving for the termination of our existence, because we exist as an embodied sense only as completing a building, which makes another thing possible, or and theoretically you arrive somewhere, which makes another arrival possible, I suppose.
Jane, just
but
to add in,
we run out of space.
So they're more specifically light switch based Armageddon cults, right? They're saying that part of all of reality is innately bad or evil, right? Is
unredeemable.
What's the term where it's like
it's a war against complexity, that if complexity increases, it will get worse, not better.
You have defined part of reality as being innately causing things to get worse, and the rest of reality to innately become better. And this is inescapable when defined as that way, because these are defined as unchangeable, as light switches, right? Mm-hmm. And so the answer to escape this inescapable definition is that at some point in the future, the world will be destroyed, we will all die, and then all of the bad things will be gone, and then only good will be left, and then everything will be infinitely good forever.
Right, and that's not, like, it's like infinity, again, I mean, there's multiple concepts of it, I suppose, but the one that most often I think is getting used is that infinity as, like, you can imagine yourself continuing to walk forward, not that all becomes one and there is no such thing as time anymore.
Right,
but
and that's why it makes sense to tie the idea of God into this idea of your polar star, right? Because this is what people are doing generally. They are setting, like, we have to walk forward forever. And then in the practice of spiritual alchemy, you could say, I have a polar star that moves, and I have to make spirals, aka I have to always change and update myself and my definitions to continue to figure out where to go towards the path I have to travel, but never in a straight line.
So it's interesting that, like, you still use I actually abandon the traveling metaphor as often as I possibly can, because I don't think my brain can really use it outside of, like, the same way that a blind person can describe color without really ever seeing it. So what
did you say, Lauren? I didn't hear.
I relate to this idea of, like, anything along the lines of, like, productivity goals, like something in the future that I'm walking toward, does not make any sense to me.
No.
It makes me intensely
It doesn't make
uncomfortable.
sense to me either.
Right,
like,
so I think it's important to abandon it, therefore.
So I have, well, maybe it's important. I'm going a different way, where I am constructing my own complicated, internal landscape that I can then relate to and travel.
But it's fair to say you're building a different model, and then you're hoping
absolutely. But I'm then applying that model. I'm building a context of this broken model that doesn't make sense to me, that allows it to make sense to me, and thus I can then use it, right?
So, okay. And here where I may be getting a little confused about what you're pointing at, what you're directing my attention towards.
That makes sense. That you would be confused.
Yeah, because I wanted to back up because I wanted to hit something here. So when I'm talking about us being able to build something very specific that other people can use, ideally what's happening is people realize that by exposing themselves to watching something being constructed, they understand what they've already seen in a new way, and then they can abandon this desire to stop doing that. Like, that actually, we have a thirst for knowledge, and we're embodied. We move through space, and it's necessary for us to continue to move through space. We can't snap our fingers and everything arrives, although, as you'll see with our phones and everything else, we actually greatly prefer snapping our fingers and everything arrives. In fact, people who are addicted to money very well know they enjoy snapping their fingers and things arrive. So really, we're not that interested in the journey, and that the issue of the journey is really, heaven for them is just taking a break. That's really what they want. They really just want and then it's like, well, then what are you going to do when you get there?
Yes,
And they haven't worked
that
on any of
makes
these
sense.
building skills, and they have no confidence in themselves as a builder. And it's so it ultimately has this kind of nihilism that I think denies what the human species wants to do, which is we tell
Okay.
these stories and we communicate to one another in order to enhance how well we can build things in the future, not to arrive at a
Mhm.
place. Or the arriving at a place thing is a
So,
necessity, but the building is
so
a
yeah, but
feature of humans.
are you building a model that takes into effect or takes into account that people do in fact want to travel places sometimes and other times they want to build?
But I would argue that traveling, how to explain this? So this is why I have a split of motivation.
So wait, sorry, allow me to keep talking for a moment. So what I suspect is that you and I are both trying to create metaphors that allow us to convert whatever we need to do or simply have it in the one kind of thinking we can do as holistic, local feature.
Yeah, that's
And
basically
you
it.
are doing it from this idea of like you need to translate anything a human would ever do into local featural directly,
Because
right?
I
More
think
literally,
your brain
right?
has been doing that to make sense of it. I think there's concepts that we believe we understood, but we actually don't, because they were made around
Right.
the global
But
configurational.
Jane, right? So you are a hermit, right? You are a wise woman. You are a person who is, like you are a philosopher, basically. You are one of the most learned people on the planet in your areas of special interest specifically, and are full of unique knowledge you've developed, more importantly. And your focus includes neuroscience. So what you're able to grasp and build within yourself is outside the reach of most other people on the planet when you're building with your understanding of neuroscience as the concepts that you use to navigate the world. Does that all make sense?
No, I understand. Well, it's
You
not
understand
necessary.
what I said?
Yeah. No, I
Or was
do.
it nonsensical?
Yeah, no, I'm
Okay.
following what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. And so I can't build the thing you're building. I'm building a thing I can build because I am entrenched in the study of mythology and stories, and which are both entrenched in these metaphors of of traveling and the hero's journey, right? And from my perspective, there are relatively small amounts of changes that we can do to these stories to make them work the way that you seem to be saying we should work. And so to me, I'm going to build that.
So you're building.
Like, obviously, I'll build the thing I can build, right?
Yeah.
A slight variation of the way we act now that allows people to still chase the straight line, but guiding it so that they're actually not traveling in a straight line by telling them you're following a spiral.
I see. So, okay.
Do you see how I am sort of using a bit of cleverness to sort of switch the context?
But
so that because Jane, sorry, I want to get
there's
this.
a problem,
It's
though.
because you, Jane, are still acting as Loki. You are acting as the person who's saying, I need you to throw out everything that you know and the way you act and keeps you safe, and then adopt an entire new world, right? Because you're changing so much of what's fundamental to people now. And I want to say, this is a thing very similar to what you have. I'm just the next god, right? This is a normal cycle, is that the next god comes, kills his parents and all the other current gods, takes over, they're the new god, you follow them now, right? This is what humans are used to and what the software we've been running for a while.
So, I mean, I'll go with anything that makes people more sane, right? Like, that's sort of the goal.
Sure, of course.
But, so
I just wanted to explain reality, the context between us, right?
Yeah. Well, so
I want to say how far you and I are. Very specifically, we know where we both are. That's what we want to do, right?
So, well, it's interesting. So, I don't know what I want to do. So, I don't know what I want to do in relationship to other people necessarily. So, if that's a way to understand it, that's fair. But I don't think I actually know what I want to do. What works. on some level, but I also don't want to do things that is dictated by other people as they think it will work. I want to do what I think will work.
Yes, of course. Right. So my definition for this now is what I want to do is one thing. I want to be a spiritual alchemist at all moments in time. The one thing I ever want to do is practice, develop, and enact and embody this concept I'm calling spiritual alchemy.
Okay.
Then I'll just have one object. I'll have a single meta object that I can finally attach everything else to.
Okay. I have a concern. So when people are moving, okay, so let's go with the global configurational and the embodied thing, right? So people are moving on basically like a number line, like they're going through space, arriving at a place, able to measure how long it's taken them, all these little features, but they're also doing that for other people. So the reason why it's a straight line is the metaphor is them moving through a space with other agents also moving through a space. So if they were to move through a spiral and everybody decided to move through a spiral, they're going to run into each other. Whereas when they move in the lines, they like zigzag out of the way. So how do you fix that?
But that's if it's literal, and it's not, because we're not talking about the physical reality, which gets to remain linear, but we're talking about the mental reality, the place that we truly inhabit, right? Where you and everyone else cannot actually touch each other. You can't run into people, right?
Well, but
they are all on their own journeys towards the same end goal of being happy.
What is the spiral? So, okay,
So the spiral is a metaphor. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this right now because, you know, the way your autistic brain works is going to want to start at the beginning and go through all the steps I've been taking. And I just took a whole lot of steps.
Okay.
Right? Not steps. We'd have to build it from scratch for you to get to where I am because I have built a complicated new thing that I'm still building.
Okay.
Does that sentence make sense?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I didn't realize that the sentence I just said was a sentence that was true until just now. And going forward, I could remember that sentence is true and make sure that I only introduce this specific topic when contextually appropriate, or I couch it in a way that makes it contextually appropriate such that I don't trip us all up.
The summary,
which is what we want to do.
The summary is that you're you're currently and have been for some amount of time more intensely.
My whole life, yes.
Well, more intensely now, but you get what I'm saying. Like
more intensely, yes.
Yes.
More intensely every day because I am spiraling, right? I have learned how to follow the dual spirals of recursion and contextualization to continually grow my sense of self and my understanding of reality. And the third spiral of health, right?
How do
these in a healthy way?
Where do
it's complicated, and now probably isn't the right time. But if you want to, we can talk about it. You know, it's up to you. We talk about now.
One quick question on it: does it spiral in or out?
It spirals in. Well, no, both. You could go either way. Sometimes you have to spiral in. Sometimes you have to spiral out. Sometimes you have to intake things. Sometimes you have to take things out of you, right? Everything within this metaphor is a two-sided coin, not as if two opposites, but as in a single thing is also at the same time the entire context with which it is its opposite and all that is in between them. It's fucking dense. Hi. Yeah.
Okay, so you're spiraling in and out simultaneously, and also you could be spiraling on other axes simultaneously.
So you need a metaphor to understand every different type of thing that you do. And so we take a shape that has 3 sides and 2 sides, and we say, okay, anything we need to understand, we can understand through our fixation on numbers, 1 and 2 and 3. And anything that's important, we can subdivide into 1 or 2 or 3 most important parts. And so I have designed a sigil, which is a symbol that contains a name, which is a triangle with a triskelion within it inside of 2 circles surrounded by darkness. And this sigil can then be used as a mnemonic tool to access more easily the complicated metaphorical understanding that allows you to interact with reality and yourself in a way that isn't diluted by this idea that that things can be divided, right? It is all underpinned by the concept that the universe can't be divided. And anytime we try to make a category, we are actually simply making a metaphor that we then use to operate as agents within the undivided reality.
Can I take a crack at this?
Did
Yes.
that make sense at all, Jane? Did you
Yeah.
follow what I was saying, or is
Yeah.
it nonsense? It did?
No, yeah, it did. It made
Sorry,
sense.
great. Because literally today I was saying things downstream of this, and people were reacting to me with gifs of that one guy from InfoWars and fucking Jordan Peterson, right? And I have a history of being traumatically humiliated and abused from my youth, because of course I do, right? And so it's important for me as someone who has realized I have been only making two spirals, the spirals of understanding, and completely neglected to grow my health spiral, right? I built understanding, I built empathy, but I never built my personal health, and I need to center at the moment building that spiral such that I no longer starve myself of basic human needs that I have known were basic human needs since I was pre-high school.
Yeah, and I'll add, and then I want to hear Lauren's thing too.
Yes.
So when you're describing something in a way that makes sense for your brain, it will be unique to your
Yes.
brain, especially when you're building it.
Yes.
So feedback from other people can sound any type
Yep.
of way, and that's
Yeah,
not
so-
relevant. It's kind of junk data at one point,
Yes.
so or another.
Yes, and also Bright Spear and I are going to be working on this because we have found that this thing that I'm building seems to be close enough to our shared special
Right.
interests and desires to build.
Cool.
Because this thing that I am building, more than anything else, like the way I said it sounds like it's a tool for other people in fixing the world. And it is necessarily, because the one main thing it is the way to understand what's wrong with me and
Yeah.
get and help myself, right?
Yeah.
So this I'm literally making a metaphor that will be holistic for all things that I know and don't know yet and eventually could know.
Right.
It is I'm learning to no longer subdivide objects and to only look at reality as a single object with features, such that I no longer have to switch between models, but rather go up and down in abstraction or
Okay.
areas on the model. I'll have a single model to work on. And thus everything I've been
see.
doing will become incredibly easier. And every day, the only thing I'll ever do from now on for the rest of my life is work on this one model. I have
Yep.
a single action to do at all times. I have solved the motivation problem because I no longer have to change what I'm motivated about.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
I
Got
built
it.
a world engine. The world is me. That's the simple
Got it.
metaphor thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That makes sense.
Thank you for saying that makes sense, because the human that I am is such a specific person that I am crazy to most people. There is a quote from a game that's important to me personally that explains this, which I'm going to quickly get and then pass us to Lauren after I say it, because we all want to hear from Lauren, and Lauren has a thing to say. Man,
Do we?
what?
Do we all want to hear from me?
Yes, we do.
Oh,
Hi, Ambulis.
Sorry,
I missed
I
something.
was so incredibly shocked that anyone would question that, because I'm not used to modeling you within these situations, right? And when I say a statement about a valuable person that they want to be heard from, and they are one of us, the only person who would object is them, because they have yet to learn to grow their self-centered spiral. They have only built their other two spirals of knowledge and empathy, and they neglect themselves and thus hurt themselves and put themselves down by routine, by rote. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Madman Manchets. This was what I was going to quote. This is from a video game made by a guy that I am convinced that if he's not personally, intentionally a spiritual alchemist, he is for all practical purposes a spiritual alchemist. and I could learn things from any game he makes to improve my life. And he says, truth oft resembles madness, inaccessible to the dull of mind. Those who go mad are merely thoughtful souls who failed to reach any conclusions. This is deeply meaningful to me. Go ahead, Lauren. I'm passing the baton.
I think that it kind of all just because like I've been a hermit and a terrible friend, and so like
those are not defined as the same thing, right? Being a hermit isn't being a terrible friend. Sorry, I'm interrupting to give you some affect regulation.
Yeah, just go with me on it. For
just not right. Right now isn't the time and place to do that, and I can understand that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Now is the time when the goal is reached by me listening to you, and I could center that. Go ahead.
And so it's been a while since I've been in, this like our this kind of conversation, and what I'm noticing just is like listening, but also thinking about like what I want to contribute is that I think what we, and by we I literally mean like the 5 of us or whatever, I don't know how many there are now, but is that I think what we're trying to do is emulate, and not to any fault of our own, but like trying to emulate this kind of neurotypical way of operation, which is we all need to be working on the same thing. Like, what is the project that we can all continue to commit to, and what is the you know what I mean? And I don't think that that's ever going to work for us, and I don't think it makes us flaky or whatever. I just think it means that like we have different, our brains are similar, and so I think that's why we can give each other good feedback, but I don't think it means that we can always collaborate. And like,
yes, of course, yes.
My thought is of like how I think of what I want to do, right? Or like what piece I want to focus on and contribute to is I think that like, like Joseph Campbell toward the end of his life, and then, towards the end of his work was like, we as kind of a society have lost a collective mythology, right? And we don't have a collective set of parameters almost, or stories, right, which are essentially values to go back to, right? It becomes very like rule based, it becomes very dogmatic, it becomes, it's not about the soul of the story, like the true benefit of mythology, right? And so
yes, that makes a lot of sense to me. And just to quickly comment, it seems like even the soul of the story that he tried to pull out and popularize has been interpreted incorrectly because of the reasons that he talks about. His hero's journey is supposed to be about everything here is the story of one person growing to be a better version of themselves.
Right.
But people think of it as like, this is the story of good being selected and sent out to destroy evil, and now everything is great, right?
Or they use it it's been, kind of like, I think, minimized into a storytelling tool. And I think that the thing that I'm good at, or like, and I want to say good in like quotes, because fuck if I know, right, is taking complex topics and presenting them to people in a simplified manner that they can digest. And I think that what my thought is that we need a new or a different collective mythology to be working off of that makes that people can accept and will make them feel safe and all that shit, while with a set of values that support like the tools that like the embodiment that Jane is talking about, and then maybe like
and
they
this
take
is the that was attempted by people like Campbell and Young both. Yes,
right. And I'm like, I don't need that, and then I just roll on through in my tank.
Right. And I'm like, so instead of maybe like, so that Jane doesn't have to just hope that a miracle happens, and somebody
Right.
with money gives it to her, like
Right.
maybe like I can with that
Right.
kind
You
of
have a set of
yeah, like
expertise which overlaps with the systems, and specifically the education systems that are in place, that Jane and I don't have that overlap, right? Each of us can be expressed as a array within a thought space, right?
Oh,
And
like
so it looks
maybe
basically like a tree with branches and roots, right? And so we
yeah,
overlap in
I have
some
an idea.
spaces, and we more importantly overlap in the material with which we exist, like the way we think overlaps. That's the
So
most important.
the
But as
motivation is
long as the
how we
branches
overlap.
touch each other, the motivation we could say is how we overlap, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I
Doing
think
is
more
building
importantly,
is
the
our motivation.
fashion in
Yeah.
which we are doing, right?
Yeah.
Wait, I think we have to find the single most recursive thing to all of us, and I think that is that we are doing as building
Correct.
people.
That is correct. That is correct. We are yes.
Not experts, right? Like independently derived, master level, working on our mastery continually type people
Right.
in this one thing.
Right, and this collapses in also with Lauren's point that we actually have to be working on
Yes.
different things, because what we're able to build is a different lens on the reality we live in. So by me constructing what
Yes.
have already been working very hard to construct, I'm getting hints about reality. Then we come in and we share those, and then from
Right.
our collective, like we all have different things that we've been working on. We'll
Diversity
get hints
is
about reality
literally
that we couldn't otherwise
valuable, right?
anticipate.
This idea of diversity as strength, what they mean is diversity is valuable. So having more diversity within us, as long as we can overlap and exchange, it's actually more valuable to be specialized in non-overlapping areas, as long as we have enough overlap to be working on models that are abstractable to each other, and thus
Right.
we can
And if we're
contribute
if
to
we're
each other's
doing
models.
yeah, if
There's
we're
no
doing
point on us doing the same work
no.
unless we're doing work together.
Yeah.
And the physical realities that we're in mean that only some of us with overlapping interests can actually work together, because some of us are on the wrong side of the planet, and etc. Right?
Well, and if we're doing sophisticated, successful work, right? Like, so if we're understanding complexity successfully, then the way that we're doing this also allows us to do what Einstein says, which is if somebody can't explain something simply, they don't know it well enough. So we're also able to get to like the root important features of the universe that enables these things to exist in the first place, without our stories or without our pretenses that turn out to be false, or our assumptions or our
Yes.
paradigms. So we
So
start. Well,
the
let's just.
way-
Oh, go ahead. I mean,
Go ahead.
well, okay. So let me
The
finish
way
this.
that Einstein phrased that implies that simple is one thing, but simple is different based on your expertise. So as a group, we can each be able to say something in one version of simple, and then translate it into another version of simple that will apply to other people.
He didn't. He
right?
didn't say if you'd attempt to explain it simply. He meant if
Attempt
you
to.
succeeded to explain it simply. If you're a master of something, that's when you can succeed in explaining it
Well,
simply. At no point
No,
prior
so
to that.
Jane, right. So someone could, like, I could know something incredibly well, but not be able to explain it simply in a way that works to others, right?
Well, he's saying
It
that you
seems
don't know it
simple
well
to me.
enough. He's saying that's not sufficient for some reason, which he hasn't said. He doesn't. There's no stated reason why he said that's not enough. Enough for what
Right.
criteria?
So
I'm suggesting that.
he implies. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm suggesting that for the pursuit of the thing actually being fully realized in your own brain, for you to be as fully competent in it as
Oh.
possible, that's the benchmark that he's saying the criteria would be for. So if I'm able to
I'm
talk
sort
to
of-
people,
I made a mistake, right? There's an implication when you say you should know it better, right, or whatever. There's
No,
this
no.
implication of morals or whatever. That
if
should
your
thing
desire
was
is
there.
knowledge
It
and
shouldn't-
yeah,
right.
and building
Yeah,
in and of
you're right.
itself, and it's just an indication of like
get it
how
now.
successful you are at doing that. So what I'm trying to say is that like when it's critical for autistic people to have environments that help them to cultivate and build better, because this is what we're good at. And when we have societies that don't make that very possible, this is our number one barrier to like having good lives on our own terms, in our own experience of them, but also to contribute to the world at large. And when we contribute to each other, that would be no
Simultaneously-
different. We do need to work on different things, because that's how we'll always be contributing to the world, by working on very specific niche things.
We are simultaneously good at it, and it is the most important skill we can build. So we need to build our ability to be good at it.
Right, because
Right.
well, I want to add something. I have to, because so like local featural, when you have something and you're so drilled down on all of the nuance of something, and that niche thing becomes so specialized that you start to form implications of the universe. You start to say, well, that means that this kind of thing could only exist in this universe, and then your degree of certainty of which universe we must be in improves dramatically as you do that. So that's what we're actually doing. So by going more refined, when you don't have the ability to do global configurational, which is why we're doing it, we have then the capacity to create a very good probabilistic guess with an increased certainty of which universe we're actually in. So our confidence level gets to go higher because of this form of specialization, and that's the only way that really works. And it's important for people to know that, because autistics can be useful in proving that to other people.
Yeah.
So they then also want to do it. Motivation, do as building.
To talk about the way motivation works for us, like you're saying, doing as building. But another way to talk about motivation that we have is that we are motivated by the probabilities related to concepts we hold and their likely value if they are developed and further, right? And so communicating them to people who are likely to have important insight on them, that's very highly important, and it's more important, more valuable, you think, the idea and its potential descendants are. So when you and I, Jane, specifically, when we say, I have to do this, it is because our motivation has gone through the roof.
Correct.
Figuratively, on the value of this crystallized idea, this concept you have just come across, and you need it to exist beyond yourself, because you can't predict that yourself is going to continue to contain this for long, right? So you need to get it out to someone who can also, the moment you communicate it to what you consider a peer,
right? Which is why we're pro-social.
You're vastly increasing the certainty.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that someone else looks at it and says, I understand what you're trying to say, just that much means that you know with more certainty that you're making sense. This is why additionally with more, this is why I crave feedback. This idea, this is like, I was on a kick with this a lot. Like, this is how I could feel better, is I need to get people to give me more feedback. But so feedback is data, and it's specifically data about the thing I'm building that is the most important thing that could exist to me. But right? That's what feedback is.
This is why we're not antisocial. We have a social impairment caused by a issue in processing in the grid cells of our brain, is where I argue it is. But we are pro-social, so we share that in common with like the vast majority of the species. It is pro-social to share accurate information that you are conscious of about how things work and what has happened and what might happen. It's pro-social to give people a good, reasonable guess of what might happen in the future without them having to experience the things that allowed you to make that prediction. And that's why it's antisocial to lie for the purpose of making somebody move in a direction for some arbitrary reason, completely unrelated.
And because humans are embodied, being antisocial cannot be a good system of being in any scale or over any decent amount of time. Antisocial behavior can only give you short-term gains at the expense of lowering your future states. And so this is what capitalism is, right? It is a codification of antisocial behavior on a species that naturally needs to act pro-socially to not destroy its environment and thus itself.
We enjoy pro-social behavior because I will argue that we really enjoy building. We tremendously, we find great satisfaction from that. You can also, so you can also find a kind of reward that we are not experiencing, and then you have autistic people with the high suicide rate on top of everything else. We're just, I think, also going to have an issue where we're more depressed relative to the baseline. Not to say that that is depression, but relative to, if we're talking about these as discrete concepts that we can then say, okay, that's mania, that's depression. I tend to do that.
Talking about being depressed rather than talking about depression as a thing, but rather like a state of being that is affecting your
yeah.
overall tendencies.
If we
right?
decide to take the center of the bell curve from the general population, we're going to be, south of that. We're going to go
Yes,
towards
exactly.
depression. So all that to say that, like, for an autistic person, one of the rewards we're missing out on is when you take a step in your global configurational reasoning, or when a typical person does, they do get focus, reward, focus, reward, focus, reward. So I want to emphasize that is like a neurologically valid way of describing that, but there's maybe other ways that we'll describe it in the future, but that's sound, and you can look that up and you can fact check me on that that's what's happening. So it's important for us to note that when we're interacting with each other and we're being pro-social, it is not pro-social to just get focus, reward, focus, reward, focus, reward. It is much more pro-social to discuss what is being built.
Right, and this is why
it's harder to do that in an antisocial way, because the machine either works or it doesn't.
So that's why the thing that you're talking about with the stepping it needs to be framed within the framing of addiction, because addiction is when you act antisocially, just period, right? But like like more specifically, it's like a certain thing has trapped you in a loop of antisociality, right? So like the reason drugs are the issue they are is you do them once for any reason, but then you're like, oh, I valued this one time. Now I'm going to make this recursive and travel more and more in the the bad drugs.
You can't
drugs, but
quite.
The ones we think of as bad, they cause or are associated with antisocial behavior. So once you're addicted to them, you spiral away from the rest of humanity.
They're chasing. They're chasing an impossible recursiveness too. So that's the whole thing where people chase the first high, but you'll never feel the first high again. You'll never feel that first high again, because part of it was the fact that you had a jump, a sudden jump, and surprise was part of it. You will never have that ever again. It will never be surprising ever again.
So you can't. The dragon is what they already call it, and the dragon is an impossible mythological being.
Yeah.
So it maps well onto reality.
Yeah. So then you have somebody. So like that. So I think that recursiveness, for people who don't know, is like this is like a form of like heuristic that the brain must be using in order for autistic people and holistic people to even exist. This just has to be true. So we're saying like, okay, this thing is stable and reoccurs, and therefore I can make probabilistic guesses based on this, because most likely it's going to persist in the universe that I'm in the next moment. It's not going to be destroyed, or if it does get destroyed, it gets destroyed in predictable ways. I can use this information to make guesses. So if somebody has this high that's just coming from their body doing a sequence of really complicated things, and it's doing it to an extreme, then all of a sudden you want to return to that because it felt pleasurable, but it's pleasure devoid of context. It's like those signals are supposed to serve a purpose in your environment, so it's devoid of the environment. It makes no sense, and that's why a drug addiction is so frightening. So be in an alleyway shooting themselves up, which is a horrible place to be to feel euphoria.
That's what causes addiction, is that these are things, whatever they are, whether or not they're physically, biochemically addictive, they are emotionally or psychically addictive, because they allow you to escape pain despite your context. And so if you are stuck in pain, right, if you're in a state that will otherwise cause you to become depressed, one way to continue to exist here without trying to escape it in the worst way possible, which is killing yourself, is to, you could go into this loop. You're stuck in pain. That's one reason.
You'd be intentionally putting yourself in pain too, to believe that in the future you can remove yourself from pain outside of the drug. So you're trying to create a recursive sense of your ability to escape pain.
Right.
So that's why you get people doing painful things and getting addicted to them.
You're trying to keep existing until you can reach a state where something else that you don't have access to now removes that source of pain.
Right, and that's why. That's why I think we should become comfortable with ourselves as pain-based, organized, and make pain unremarkable. Yes. Not something that we don't respond to. We should be responding to it much faster than we are. But we shouldn't be treating it as a disaster and a misfortune or a curse. Pain is what we use constantly to define existence itself, and that's fine. It's also fear, it's also danger, it's also threat. It's fine.
The entire metaphor of emotions is something that needs to be deconstructed and be replaced, right? We need to recenter on things that are factual.
Shout out theory of construction
pain
emotion.
and affect, right? These things that actually relate to our embodied existence, right? And again, this is why like the issue exists with mythology, is because it isn't anywhere tied back to physical reality. There's no way to keep it in line, to keep it aligned with the moment it was created, and it was useful in that moment. But as it drifts away from usefulness, you can't tell, because there's no direct lines between this
and
and reality.
I have hostility towards mythology in general, because so many people will use it to discredit women that I'm like, oh, just shut up. Like, it's just like, it gets me pissed off, because it's like, even if somebody's using it for a metaphor for a time to address something that's of critical importance that is valid,
all the
they get invalid.
Books, and the only place where people valued women properly was in mythology, right? Because you look at Lilith, you look at that which is cast out, and then you value it through the counterculture reaction of Wiccans and people like that. Suddenly you invert the oppressive system, and you now look at the world right side up.
And my value,
right? This is why I identified with Wiccanism and Satanism, and now am growing as an alchemist, right?
Yeah, and for me, I'm just like,
because our contexts are different. That's all I'm saying. Basically.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's really important for me, and I guess it's interesting to me, because for me, the most important thing I can do is just stand to the side of it and be like, look, I didn't dissolve. You didn't melt the witch. I'm still here. I didn't disappear. I exist outside of this, and that's my like way of. I don't know. That's just where I want to live. I want to live in that alternate space that it's supposed to not exist, and yet I do. So I think that's why I'm like, it's just like I give up on that. Let's see. My curious. Oh, cool. We have a new person in the YouTube. That my curiosity seems like a curse because I'm not rich. Very relatable. Highly relatable. So the point of what we're doing here is to find ways that your curiosity can not be as limited by that as it currently is. And we're going to try to maximize that as much as possible. Ideally, finding a way to convince people who do have access to resources to be, like, I guess, patrons or something of the weirdos. I don't know. But, like, some sort of, like, practical solution that involves other people. I don't know what the hell that is, and I apologize. But in the meantime, like, how much can we do on our own terms if we insulate ourselves a little bit of some portion of our weeks to talk to other autistic people, or people, even if you don't have a diagnosis, whose brains do function better this way or have refined it, and it's necessary for us to do some amount of brainstorming.
So in, like, the answer space for that thing that you just said needs to exist, like, I see that grounded in a vastly different political landscape and a different economic landscape, because I have theories through which how these things came to be and how they could change, right? And we're going to see different potential answers based on who we are as individuals, and that's good.
Right. And I often will just ignore.
But what we share is that we can see the same problems, we can see the same reality, and we can communicate to each other in a way that is natural and comes to us even intuitively often.
Yeah, that tracks.
When I'm around Jane, I am not impeded by Jane, right? Yeah.
Lauren?
Lauren.
Right. So, and I'm realizing about myself that my dad did this too, is that he would take these pauses while he was speaking, and I or whoever would think he was done, and he wasn't, and he was just taking a pause that was longer than most people would take. And I think because our brains are working so quickly that we tend to get in a loop where we talk really fast, and so I might take those pauses. So what my dad did is he would just say, like, okay, I'm done. And then I knew he was done. So unless, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a point at which you're like, are you done? It was a really long pause. I will try and like do that so that it's clear when I'm pausing and when I am.
I like to say I'm done too.
Yeah. Because I realized like my dad definitely did that. And I remember as a kid, like he would be like, don't interrupt me. I'd be like, you weren't talking.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And he's like, I'm not done. Right. So maybe that will,
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe that's a thing I should do.
Thank
Anyway.
you for centering that concept. And just quick context, like I came from the fucking Twitch politics space. Obviously, understandably, compassionately, of course I have problems with taking space and giving space, because the only way to get resources there was to jump on them first.
Yeah,
so
and
thank you for setting that set of rules, because then they had no rules. It was brawling and chaos to hurt each other. And I spent so much of my life there in the masculine sphere, and I'm going to cry about it now, and you can keep talking, Lauren, as I process this trauma. I finally unlocked.
No, that's good.
Like, this is good that I'm crying. I cried in one of those spaces, and they kicked me out of the panel and said they did me a favor. And then I said, I'm never coming back here again, because I met Jane 2 weeks ago. And now I know what being a decent human being looks like. I'm allowed to cry. That's normal.
It's
and
normal.
if I can make it not interrupt and still get all that I need, if I don't need affect regulation, then you can all continue with your lives while I cry, and everything is good.
Yep, and that's
like,
go ahead.
I think for me, this is actually a good kind of like way to take the metaphor I was thinking of and like apply it, right? Because like, I think that what I want to do and how I want to use the way my brain works is, I think that a lot of what we do in the world is we are trying to kind of swim against the current, and that tires us out, but that gives us a thing to do, right? And I think having the thing to do and like this appearance of going forward, comforting, right? But I don't think that, not to us, but like other people. And I think that what my goal and space, to have is for myself and for other people, and realizing now, and really because it doesn't work for me, right, is that like the way that you have the most control over your body in the ocean is to float, and the only way to float is to relax. And so I want to be a person that creates ways and stories and processes and tools and to assist people in feeling comfortable floating, as opposed to fighting against the tide. And I think in this situation, it's one of those things that's like, hey, like, it's cool. Like, it's you being able to recognize, like, you can trust us to give you space. And it's hard for your body to know that, and your body to relax and let that happen, even though consciously you know that, right? And for me, that's kind of the basis of how I want to do my work.
I have a thing I wanted to add because it's important.
I'd like to go next. Oh no, well, we could start going, Jane, Lauren, if Shadow wants. Lauren, Jane, if Shadow wants to go, and then me, and then we could go in turn. Okay,
that's fine. Let's try that. So, getting back to the political Twitch thing, because there was a very interesting thing on Twitch where it's very gender rolled out. Like, you have to have specific things. The men in that space believe they are boxing or punching or doing like they think they're hitting each other. So their metaphor for how they're conversating is to hit each other, and you basically you punch, take a blow, take a punch. And then they wanted women in the space to do the metaphor of hugging, right? Now imagine the metaphor instead of communication, which is the most appropriate one, of like, here is my show and tell. So if somebody tries to punch my show and tell object, I'm going to lose my shit and never go back there, for one. And like that's like, okay, because that's what happens in those spaces. But similarly, it's weird if somebody's like, here's my show and tell objects, like, oh dear, oh darling, hug, 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 hug. I'm like, no, I don't need to feel better right now. Please hold on, no, stop. Like, we can do affect regulation, as I call it. That is a thing that humans do. We can do it for ourselves. We can ask and request it. We can do it in a collaborative way. But also we have things, ideas that we need to talk about, and that's what we need to do. That space, however, wanted men to prove that they could try to punch each other with their words, which is stupid. Because also, if you did the amount of punching that they did, they would have no bones in their hand. It would be goo. They would be useless. They couldn't build anything ever again, because they would have turned themselves into jello that hangs out in a hospital for the rest of their lives on a ventilator. So also fuck them. But yeah, go on!
Okay, so it's interesting that you focus on the physicality of that impossibility, because of course that is one of the most prominent metaphors that people in that space are utilizing.
Oh, because they're trying to.
Expertise in physical reality.
Yep.
But also, that space is just also, it is a particularly metastasized tumor of the cancerous growth that is the experience of misogyny as a male identified person, and one that is lacking appropriate resources to be given the amount of growth and flourishing that you can get even as a male within a misogynistic system, which of course is not true flourishing. The most you could be half an unhealthy human. That's the most you could be, even if you're all of the privileges, right? But that is where people falling through the cracks, some of the most disadvantaged in a specific set of circumstances, where the internet and video games pull you into a tide pool, where you all start to drag each other down, right? It's a bucket of crabs that have been starved.
Yep.
Right. And so they need affect regulation, and the ability to develop affect regulation was abused out of its natural development.
Yep.
And they have been infected with trauma-based ideas of abuse. Right. So there's different kinds of trauma-based realities you can take into yours. And these men in particular took in the reality of, you need to become that which abused you, that you might escape. And so when you say they're trying to punch each other, no, what they like, they think that on some level, because that's part of some of their identity as masculine, because they have gone all in on masculinity and femininity being things that make sense and are the keys for them to access any amount of emotional regulation, which will allow them to stop being in desperate pain at all times. And so they are sex addicts, whether or not they have ever had sex, right? They are women addicts, whether or not they are straight, right? They are addicted to externalized regulation because they have taken and bought into this assumption that that's how a human, or the kind of human they are, can possibly get access to regulation, right? There are two paths. You can abuse someone, or you can sexually abuse someone, right? These are the paths, right? A woman coming up to you and giving you free affect, right? Only doing that because she's been groomed, right? So you've outsourced the abuse. The only way for them to get free affect regulation without being a compassionate, non-abusive asshole is through abuse, right? The rest of us, people who are healthy, can get outside emotional regulation from others by giving others emotional regulation sometimes, or otherwise existing in the realm of pro-sociality. But they have gone to the realm of the antisocial and the misogynist lens, and they have circled and circled and circled, and they have spent their lives getting better at harming each other using their words. And you can't punch someone over the internet, but you can absolutely cause continual, ongoing, permanent, possibly damage to people with simply words. And they have mastered that very horrible, awful, grotesque, bizarre art. They are the world's leading experts on hurting people in irreparable ways with nothing but their abusive disdain, ignorance, and hatred. Yeah, that's enough for me for right now. Go ahead, Laura, if you want to talk.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. I think too, what I like, the way to that, I think too, is to have people really look at themselves and to not look for outside sources. Like there is no one true, there is no real truth about experience. That we can know as a human being on this planet. I can't know that, right? I cannot know that this one thing will go over the same way with every person every time, right? That's just not possible. And that too seems to be scary, which is why I think people get they get some of it, for some of that like culty stuff comes in, like, hey, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like, we found the thing. You need the thing. You
Right.
don't have to keep. It's
May
this
I add
thing.
a sentence? Would you mind?
Like, is it okay if I finish?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You do your whole thought.
Otherwise I'll like totally forget what was happening. And I think I guess what's been beneficial for me, and I think like, is being able to look at all of these tools and that there are in the world, and to evaluate them and to say, this one is good for me, this one isn't, and to guide people through the process of going, this is good for me and this isn't. Not, hey, look, I already know what's good for you. Because the process of looking at myself and truly being in touch with what's happened to me and who I am and the way the world sees me and all, like, that's a tough journey you're asking people to go on. That's tough. It's much easier for me to go, hey, you know what? Just read this book. Okay, bye. Like, that's so much easier. And I think that my desire is to figure out a way to like guide people through that process, not to an end goal, right? But to a ability to evaluate the effectiveness of things for themselves, right? And that then looks globally. Like, is it good for you if so-and-so, like, Bob, you know what I mean? Like, is it good for you if we're all competing? Is it good for you if some people make $2 an hour? Essentially, no, right? But like, that process of having to maybe give up some of your, like, it's just a really scary process to figure out where you fit in all of that, what works for you and who you really like, and that collective human experience, to be in tune with that. And like, that I think is where I'm drawn. And then like, Jane's work would inform that, like, I think that would inform what I'm doing, And I think like, if you create a tool that is super, that's here, I don't know, try this one, like, and I think that's where we can come together and go, hey, this is what I'm doing, like, how can it support what you're doing? This is what I'm doing, how can it support what you're doing? And not like, let's all tone down what our things are so that we can all work on the same thing. I think that's been a mistake.
Yes. Right. Like, I'm like creating this idea of a religion that encompasses and focuses on the opposite of a religion. as in its holistic totality. I don't even personally know the closest words we have to this concept of a thing and its opposite and all between them together as one object. But it is a concept that, if practiced, is going to stretch your ability to think about thoughts and to abstract innately, right? And you can then set as like the fundaments the fact that you must always set new fundaments, right? It's very abstract seeming, but it can then become very simple through the practice of knowing something really well, right?
Yeah, because floating is easy, essentially, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But it's the hardest thing to do when you're in a hurricane, and our lives are hurricanes.
Yeah.
The world is a hurricane.
Oh, and I was going
So
to
I
say,
think
like,
that's
to
the
rephrase one quick thing you were saying, Lauren, is that what humans need to extricate themselves from the false narrative, understanding, belief, whichever, that certainty is a thing that could exist, like that certainty is. Certainty isn't a thing. It is a
that doesn't
nonsense.
exist.
Right? It's a pizza thread.
Yeah.
But it is itself extra natural. It's outside extra reality. It's outside of reality. It can't be anything. But once you think it could be a thing, if it was a thing that made any sense, it would be far more valuable than not certainty, which is what you then think exists, right? If you create a false thing, you also create the opposite, and then you don't like the opposite and you like the false thing. Unless the false thing you create is bad, and then you automatically create its opposite and you like its opposite, right? This is where light switch comes in. If you create a thing that doesn't make any sense, you also create its opposite at the same time. That's equally nonsensical, but now your brain can latch onto them and hurt itself because you've made you can hurt yourself in your confusion, right? You have caused yourself to now be infected in your brain space. Your new sphere, right, has been infected by an incomprehensible nonsense that's going to cause you to be blind to reality, to be unable to interact properly with reality until you take it out of yourself.
Yeah, and I think my talent is being able to take all of the concepts like that, being able to simplify them in a way that is digestible to people who aren't us, if that makes sense. Which I think could be valuable. I'm also done, by the way.
Popular club pod people. Oh, we can talk a little bit about popularity. I've been kind of bopping around. I was also checking in with Jamie because I was explaining something way off topic in the Twitch chat. Okay, so popularity, yes. I think it's important I'm going to pivot a lot because I want to get back to some of the topics I wanted to talk about earlier today. So I think it's important for people on the spectrum to be concerned with whatever seems most useful to you, and if popularity is included in it, check if it's like a desperate attempt to get people to give you help, because I think I have some resentment towards that at this point because of the way the algorithms are working, where the algorithm is like Gatsby at the Gatsby party telling you must meet so and so, you must meet so and so. So autistic people, we can like end up in spaces and situations where we're trying to meet people for the value of like maybe we will then be treated well and get resources because these people will help us to get them. Whereas what should be happening is we're like, hey government, redo the Americans with Disability Act. Hey government, what do you have in Canada? Redo that. It is not written correctly for our disability.
Yes.
We shouldn't have to be popular to be okay.
These hierarchy-based systems of resource allocation will always have one form of hierarchy that is currently the one that people who don't have any hierarchy at the moment are most able to theoretically gain hierarchy from, right? And so this changes over time because our hierarchy system's always growing and changing. It's a living thing, right? And a new technology will allow a new space to exist where the popularity landscape is vastly bigger now than it was. We are actually creating more social landscape, and in a way, we're like shrinking all of the attention landscape that used to exist to make more new space. So like metaphorically, there's more attention landscape now because there's more ways for people to spend attention on other people or show attention to other people, right? This is what popularity is. It is how often are other people looking at you, right? And the more people look at you, the more hierarchical you are, because the person in charge is the person who everyone looks to when they speak. That's right. Like that's a descriptive answer of who's in charge. Whoever everyone looks at, whenever they speak, everyone looks at them, they listen to them, and then they think about and enact and do based on that person. That person is in charge. This is what is commonly called power in these really vaguely defined systems. It is just attention. The more that people pay attention to you in whatever way that isn't abusive, right? A non-abusive attention is power. And of course, abusive attention is then the opposite of power, because power is a fake thing we invented. Therefore, it has a quote-unquote opposite. Yeah.
Right. Well, Jamie is saying this platform is based specifically on that hierarchy system. Host, mod, VIP, chat. This is on Twitch. Chatter to clout. Number of viewers, all of the data points that people compare, decide they're more important or special compared to someone else. Yet both are just sat there playing a game. Well, and it's and there's likability. That's why I like when the global configuration is broken down into this XY axis of like hierarchy, but also like relationship closeness. So like how bonded you are, like how if you this is another thing autistic people don't do very well or understand. It's like, are you an acquaintance, are you a boyfriend, are you a this, are you that, right? So like all of us are not able to see how those dynamics interact and all the nuances between the X and Y axis in any given interaction. But when those things are assigned as like labels, like this is what you do, this is what you do, I would like it to be that this is what you build. Like you have this title in order to make it clear what you're building, like what you are good at. What if somebody needs to ask you for something, that's what you do. Like similarly, it's like in our society, doctor gets a weird status symbol as like you're smart or something like this, and as opposed to like I want to know, okay, which doctor knows about the condition that I almost certainly have. So I need to talk to them specifically because of what they've built. And if they're not good at it, then I don't want to talk to them, and I don't particularly care that they are called a doctor. Like it's only relevant to me that this is a sign to say this person knows how to do this thing. Like it's just saying, you know, if you wouldn't be in the I don't know, like haberdashery if you don't know how to make hats. Like I just want to know, what do you do? What's your thing that you're building? And that information, when it's supposed to, you know, get across to us, simply doesn't. And then it becomes a hierarchical thing. And then I have to ask, like, no, but what do you really do? But why are you really here? Like, what is really going on? And that's exhausting for me because I don't care. I just want the stuff that I came in for, you know, in the first place to get.
Right. And it's like, I realize, like, people say, what do you do? And they mean, what is, or what's your profession, right? They kind of mean your profession. What do you do? And they do mean, like, what do you do? They don't just mean your job. It's just that they expect that your job is the thing that you do. They're saying, what kind of tool are you, effectively? Do you shovel? Do you calculate? Do you travel, right? They're saying, what kind of tool are you? I want to know more about you, and I can contextualize you quickly by first categorizing you in this manner, right? To grow context, categorization is a quick way to do that. They're trying to relate to you, but we as autistic people don't understand that particularly, or can not understand that sometimes, and then we feel the opposite of being related to. We're like, why are you asking me about this thing that I don't know about? But I realize, like, what there should be a word that is closest to what I do, what my profession is, which is I think all the time about how to improve reality and for humans, right? I spend all of my time, energy, and resources on how to make humans less tortured and to reduce pain that humans are in. And based on their proximity to being me, starting with me and going out in metaphorical proximity. I'm trying to reduce pain for humans by thinking about how we could do that, right?
Yeah.
And the closest idea is like I'm a hermit, right? Like I'm a person who goes off and thinks. That used to just be the religious people who'd go off and think because they're given free money, right?
Yeah. That's why I tell people I'm a feral intellectual. I'm like, that's probably the best, quickest way to explain what's happened here.
Feral. Okay, so I should probably adopt that or something similar. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because all I need is to get them in a ballpark. I need them to think about what kind of category is the thing I just said. And then if they don't have one, they can then ask me questions and build one, right? But I just needed to know what they're trying to do. And I didn't know that until a few minutes ago. They're trying to just categorize me, right? And that makes sense. That's what humans do. That is the thing humans do.
Let me check time. So it is 2:43, so we go till 3, just as a reminder. Yeah, that was all I had to say.
Yeah, the more I get into etymology, the more that I end up liking words that people don't like, or like that I know socially the expectation is that I'm uncomfortable with. Right? So like I actually love the idea now of calling myself disabled. And I've gone from preferring, just saying I'm autistic to I have autism, right? And now I'm like, I actually really like it when I say I'm an autist because it is just boiled down to facts, right? I am a person whose relationship to the fact that they are autistic is one of the most important things about me. And I want to center it using blunt, direct language that will draw your attention. I do not want these layers of removal that can be applied linguistically, so that often for people to feel more comfortable who aren't even themselves autistic, but also to have other autistic people feel comfortable sometimes, right? But it's not about my comfort. And so when I talk about that in spaces where I choose to go, which is not onto a giant stage, right? I'm going to call myself how I like to be called and make space for my own needs, finally. Right?
Yep.
Is it, right? And then I've gone through massive healing, compounding massive healing. It is ongoing. I keep letting out traumas and experiences and parts of myself that have been sealed away so they don't hurt me, because I finally reached a place where I'm healing. And then once you start healing, you can keep healing because you have the resources you get from each layer of healing compound and bring you back to the layer of resources that you would have if not requiring healing.
Right. Yep.
So it is a compounding effect. So from now on, I expect to always be healing from this damage I've accrued to my mimetic and psychological and emotional layers of myself, unless something external bad happens to me. I'm on a path towards healing and growing that I've never been on and couldn't even imagine. And so I'm always coming out with large shifts in my entire sense of the world because I finally have a place and model that is growing. I don't know where I started that sentence, so I can't know if I wrapped it up or not. So I'm provisionally done.
Okay.
I'm using the metaphor of weaving more and more, and
I like
especially
that.
if you think of weaving something circular, because it is a specific kind of building that where you can then center yourself on metaphorically, right? So like I've lost track of my stitch means like, oh, I don't know where it's about to go, and like I've lost. I've lost the weave, or I don't know the specific language. I don't know enough about sewing or weaving or whatever. But this idea that like I don't know where I started, so I can't tell if I'm done, is true of this kind of building, right? If you're making a scarf, if you don't know coordinates to where and when you started, you can't know if you got to the end of it yet, right? If you don't know the context of the whole thing you've been saying,
Right.
then suddenly you're lost as to what to do, because you think maybe you're done, but you don't know and can't simply find out either. You have to say, I did this thing, right? And I don't have a word easily accessible for the thing, but like we could imagine what it is once I talk about it this way, right? I've possibly finished, but possibly not, and I don't know.
Yep.
I've lost my origin point. Is
Origin point.
another
Yeah,
way to do it.
I like that.
Yeah. World tree axis, the world axis mundi. The center of the self also can be called the origin, and that can also be the origin point, right? And so origin is a very recursively flexible, useful term that can be sort of centered in your existence as an autistic person as one term to reach towards when you don't know what to reach towards. That's the thing I'm doing, is I'm finding a set of tools that I can center their versatility and the fact that their versatility doesn't cause them to become ambiguous, right? Because all of these different layers of ways I could think about an origin, it all has to go back to the same meaning. There's no origin that isn't origin, right? It is right. And so what it means is that this is a word that is as close as possible to being a tautology. The closer to a tautology a word is, or the definition of a word is, the harder it is for this tool to become imprecise, for this tool to degrade in usefulness, right? And I noticed this because Brightspear was talking about a circle, and he said, a circle is round. He was describing a circle. He defined a circle. And I'm like, what? To my mind, when I hear a circle is round, you basically just said the same thing twice, which that's the meaning of the word tautology. It means to say the same thing twice, right? And so if you have words that when you say them different ways, they're still the same word, they still seem to be the same object, that's a good object for communication. Good is a word that I'm going to want to extricate from my active use, because it has been inextricably laden with connotations. I've got a neat little story I came up, a little parable, if you want to hear it in a bit, about connotations. Jane,
Can
go
I
ahead.
define a circle really quick?
Sure.
A circle is a curved line that finishes where it began.
Sure. Or a circle is I forget the word, but like all of the points that are equidistant from a single point on a single plane
That too.
make up
It
a
has to be
circle,
both.
right?
Because like technically I guess it'd be an
there
oval
are
if you
ways
don't do
to
it.
say the same thing in different ways, even mathematically, right? This is what equations or balanced equations or whatever
We're trying to
are,
describe something in as many ways as we can on one sense, and in another sense we're just trying to be speedy to make sure that we all know.
We are trying to describe at least one single thing in a way that doesn't degrade over time. We want to get a single recursive ideal. And the closest we've gone into is one, the idea of a single thing. And then all of math is utilizing logic to grow our understanding from this one single simplest thing to define that is most like the base level, right? And the rest of math is saying, because we have one defined piece of meaning, we can define more things in relation to this piece of meaning, right? So this is why numbers are important. This is why math is important. It's our strongest tool to define things strictly and not become confused either on our own or together.
Well, that's okay. So it's really actually like one is profound because you're basically saying exists.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
we can use different metrics to discuss what that amount of existence is. But yeah.
Yes. And that thing that I said is profound because 2 is the issue that this is the thing that is most harming humans right now, is the fact that 2 is complicated. Because 2 is light switch. 2 is the basis of all psychological damage. The fact that you first separate yourself from the other, and you start to think that universe isn't a single object to learn about, right? Mm-hmm. You have divided, and division in this context is bad. It is the root of things getting worse over time. There's a Japanese idea called kigure, and it's the idea that things get worse over time because a spiritual thing is being added, and once added, it could never go away, and it causes more of itself to be added. And this thing could simply be described as confusion, right? The moment you add confusion about reality into the mix, you start to generate more confusion about reality, and it is extremely difficult to get rid of confusion once it has been introduced, to the point that, like, this is the problem that we want to work on worldwide, right, Jane? Like, we want to fix the world. We have to find the answer to fix it if no one was confused. But the harder part is we have to solve the fact that everyone on the planet is confused about everything.
Well, we're upset at the confusion. To me is just an error, right? So there's some sort of like prediction error. And that's at that point we should learn, not deny that it occurred.
Right. But so the specific errors that people have made make them hostile to the concept of learning.
Yeah.
And thus their state of being is recursive. It is both spreadable and maintains itself over time.
Yep.
Thus it is a living thing. This is what we talk when I talk about mimetic health, right? Mimetic health. There are errors about reality that can be made that then become recursive and spread and become living things that can like selection pressure can then cause to become even more recursive and spread more and do more harm because they're spreading errors. We're just we have errors in us and they spread to each other, and we don't have the science of how to take errors out of people's minds yet. Well,
we don't. Errors are fine as long as you know it's there. Like, it's but they don't. No. So like, we should differentiate somehow between an error that you know you've made and an error that you don't know you've made. Because the error you don't know you made is delusion.
And you've made an error. Delusion. Okay, so this is what it is, right? It's delusions.
Yeah.
We're dealing with recursive delusions. That language is very simple now that I think about it.
Yeah, and this is why I describe it as a finger trap.
Delusion.
So the delusion is the finger trap, and normally if you were to leave something or go away from something, you would go away, so you pull. So it's like, so we have a sense that pulling should work, and it just makes you tighter and tighter. You have to cut the trap or work together to get out in some way. Something has to act on the trap that you're on to then have you move in a functional way. So you can't move functionally when you're stuck in this system, because the more you try to get out, the tighter it gets.
We actually already have this language of being trapped within delusions, right?
Yeah.
And so the trap is when you make this kind of error that generates a delusion, and then you make the additional error of believing it to not be an error, right? And then especially if you make an additional error of creating a thing that you believe can't ever stop being part of existence now that you've started to believe in it,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
This is the issue we're facing, is that, right, people then start to conform all further things they do with that variable. And so all of the learning about reality they do is off by the amount this variable changes their calculations and
Yeah.
predictions.
Yeah.
Not calculations, predictions.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm gonna make a microwavable pizza. Do do do.
My
Sorry.
favorite video games that I'm spending all the time thinking about and playing turn out to be the thing that I need to use to make the answer to the problem that I have. And I'm like, oh, that seems so synchronous, or like, like, oh, wow, that's heaven sent. But rather, that's just the nature of reality. That should always be true. The thing in your environment that you care most about just is going to be, if you're not delusional, the thing that you most require to solve the problems you currently have, right?
Yeah,
If you
especially
happen
its
to have
recursiveness is
medicine,
good.
right? If you have a
Yep.
cure
Yep.
for pain and you're in pain, you're like, oh, I take that cure for pain, right? So
Mhm.
if there's anything that can help me in the situation I'm in around me, that's the thing that I'm most interested in, and that thing should be the same object, unless I'm making an error, unless I'm delusional, right? Or wrong or delusional. They're different things.
Yeah.
Wrong is being wrong, right? Delusional is being wrong and specifically thinking you're correct.
I think trauma. I want to say something in chat. I know you've been looking at trauma, so I have like a guess on this. So okay, I'm gonna read what Jamie said, then I want to say something right after. I'm gonna try to read this. Okay, we're gonna grab this because there's actually a decent amount. So like adding a new person to an already established group on Twitch. Errors would be clashes due to what others are expecting or placing onto you, and because you're not compatible with their worldview, they're clashing with you. Imagine them orbiting and everything is fine, then they collide with you and they behave the way they thought was normal towards you, and then then you don't output the reply they expected. It causes a trauma node, and the more times you collide with them and create new nodes, you become a more heavier burden of it. Irrational, you didn't really do anything. It might be you didn't do something and they won't tell you what it was. So yeah, so they have a sense of should. That's a really good paper you should look up. It's from Lisa Feldman Barrett's lab. I forget the main author on it. It's one of her dudes in the lab. That's pretty cool. So that's, look up the sense of should, read that paper. You're on
to
that.
quickly define term. Does it make sense to say intuitive means a thing that you're able to do in a way you think is correct and successful that you have not studied well? Is that a thing that you find intuitive? Or that you don't understand, not studied well? If you have an intuitive understanding of something, are you saying that you're able to act as if you have an understanding of that, but you're not aware of what your understanding is?
Probably that's fair. I tend to avoid the word intuitive because of its history.
Yes.
So
I avoid it because I don't have a working definition of it because it's weird. And
Yeah.
I've been trying to understand, but I need to understand what people mean when they say it, because they use it often.
You might need to force them to do a different word, because I don't know if they know what they mean either, because it signals a lot of like light switch cult stuff.
Right. We're different people working on different the same problem, but different versions of the problem, because we're all looking at it from where we are. Right, there's this one fourth dimensional image that is the answer to the collective problem all people are suffering under as humans.
Yep.
That the answer is different from different spaces, but taken as a collective, we're all building the same answer if we're pro-social. Because pro-social means fixing all problems of everybody.
Yeah, and eventually. I wanted to say to Jamie, like, so with what Jamie was just saying, so basically, like, when you're doing something that's not expected in the space and people have to learn, that's more metabolically expensive, and the expectation may be that they're not going to learn in that space in that way, so they may feel angry about that because now you're draining them. So it's like it's not what they came there to do, and what they can't anticipate you. So you're a problem in that sense, and that's a metabolic problem. So there's a resistance to it in the theory of should, like metabolically, but also that like if you're in a space and you do something that's unexpected and the people really really don't like it, they may learn to not have people like you around again. So they may create a bias or something like this. So like learning occurs, but they're like they may be trying to resolve a metabolic issue that you're representing, and as an autistic person we can basically be exhausting, and I think that's fair for us to say.
I just defined common sense in a way that makes sense to me. Common sense is the thing that they predict any other person's sense of should pass to them, right? It is the lowest common denominator of how people should all know to act. They should at least have the common sense to have this much knowledge of how to act around others and on their own. So if you don't know something that they always predict a human should know, they're like hurt because it's a prediction error, right? They're like, and they are confident that people should know that, because except for rare people like us, everyone else does know that,
and
that they know.
If you're
right?
rarer, so they also will compare you to instances. They'll compare you to instances of something similar, like what is this most like? So they'll also compare you to other groups of people that they're more likely to come in contact with than an autistic person, because we're pretty rare. And so they'll compare you to other stuff as well. So you'll get like misunderstood and
I'm not psychic, right? Because we're saying like the equivalent of I am blind, except we don't know that we have a disability that's an knowledge, that's an equivalent to blindness. So we don't say I'm disabled in the specific way we are because we're autistic, but you say I'm not psychic. Because the closest term, the closest collective concept we have is being psychic, because when they say you should know this, you should do this, you should have already known this thing, they are saying you should know this thing I'm saying now, right? That's like, oh, so I should read your mind. And they're like, no, you shouldn't read your mind. I'm trying to describe reality. I'm saying, oh, I notice you are broken because everyone should know this and you don't. Right? And they don't know how to fix you because you're not in their models, because we don't collectively understand autism, so they can't really be in our models. And like you were saying, they'll use the closest thing if they can, and if they've had interactions with people like us, they're more likely to be able to fit us into their models and their individual sense of what people should be like, right? And then every individual person, like people are an expression of the relationships that person is, right? It's a recursive relationship thing. And so every person's going to have their own expression of who they are that makes them react to different things in different ways, right? So some people will react strongly to the fact that you're not what they expected, others won't as much. And this isn't about you. This is literally isn't about you. It's about them, literally. Like it is an expression of what they are, right? A mathematical expression, not an expression, but like mathematically, it's an expression.
Not every space can work with autistic people. You'd have to have a couple of things that definitely are there. And right now, there's a lot of spaces for social reasons, they want to say they can accommodate us when they absolutely cannot.
Yes. Because their sense of should includes the fact that all common spaces should be accessible to all people.
Right.
Right? And so there's an issue within that sense of should for them.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't want to just say, they don't want to just say, unfortunately, we acknowledge the reality that most places aren't good places for autistic people to be because of whatever reason that specific person has for saying or thinking that, right?
Yeah. It is 3:06 or 6:06 Eastern. We should wrap up. And we'll be back next week. And hopefully I'll be here on the weekdays for my same idea. It's been difficult, everyone. I have like an appointment on March 27th with the rheumatologist for them to almost certainly tell me I have lupus. So I've been having lupus, and it's just a lot. And then my dog has to have surgery on his elbow. So womp womp. So that's why it got real bad. Well, I don't know. Yeah. So I've been having like a lupus flare, I think, almost certainly, without getting to say it for certain. You know how that be. So apologies if it still doesn't catch, but hopefully tomorrow morning, 8:30. 8 is too early, but 8:30 PST, I will be doing something akin to this with less focus on space necessarily, like working on your environment necessarily, but more of this idea. Well, any other closing thoughts? Also, I'm eating a pizza. Sorry if that's like weird mouth noise. I'm gonna mute myself. You else want to talk? Am I done?
Put out there for a minute, but no, I'm good.
Thank you, Political Magic. Thank you for being here. It's awesome to have someone in the YouTube now. If you know anybody that would appreciate this, tell them. Sunday we work on our environments, so space management stuff. You can try, see if it helps you at the same time. Doesn't have to. You can do other stuff as well, but do try it. I insist. Because if it does work for you, great. And then you could also work into going into the Discord. If that works for you, then you can work into going onto the call as well, and you can participate in the discussion part of it.
So
No pressure, though.
That turns talking. This is where a hierarchy is useful, right? If we had a set hierarchy, and in fact, I'm working on a tool for autistic people to use about this, right? Because of course I am. And it's going to be a system where you set a hierarchy of who talks when and who takes space when, right? You have simply said, we need someone to take the most space, aka act first, aka be looked to first, right? So you have 4 people, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and you could set this up as a circle, as we tried, but that's actually not the best, I don't think, unless you're in a very specific circumstance. But generally, it's not great to use. We like to go at the moment after something happened. So instead, you have a hierarchy of who's more, quote unquote, in charge of leading the conversation from, captain, first mate, the next thing, right? You have these 4 things. And then after someone has ended speaking, the first moment of silence is a moment of silence. And then if you're the captain at the moment, you could then start speaking. And if the captain doesn't, and there's a second moment of silence, then the first mate can start speaking. Then if they don't start speaking, and there's another moment of silence, then the person in third can start speaking, right? And if not, the person in the 4th position in the hierarchy can start speaking. And I think this could work well for systems of people that like that, right? It's just an option that could solve the hierarchy issue in a way that can be set once, learned, and then not have to be readdressed.
Okay. I'm gonna end the stream. Folks on Twitch, I don't raid because it's possible I hate it. I don't know. But
yes,
it's possible I hate it. So we're just not doing it until that's clear that I don't hate it. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. I'm gonna stay in the Discord for a second. But goodbye, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Start to the next week. Give yourself a little bit of time during the week if you can to just remind yourself that little ideas are important. So if you have a cool little idea, it is also important. Goodbye.